Please join me in the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Robert. Welcome all that are here and all those that are live streaming this evening. We will start this with Jason Lux, our Development Service Director, to start this off. Jason?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, Council. Hello, can everybody hear me? Yes. Okay, if you can't hear me, somebody just shout out and I'll start talking louder. I'd like to welcome everybody to our second workshop regarding the proposed draft changes. As you recall, the last workshop was meant to just kind of go over and give a very rough general overview of those proposed changes and a little bit of background as to why those changes were being proposed. So tonight we're going to focus a little bit more on a couple of specific topics. At the end of the meeting, Council had some comments and we made some notes, and there was several issues that they wanted to revisit or wanted some more information about, so that's what we're here tonight to present. So again, there's a lot of information to cover and we want to have some discussion, so I'm going to move rather quickly through this, and so just bear with me, please. So tonight, the proposed topics that we'll be focusing on are conditional use permits, cap limitations regarding short-term rentals. We've got some updated data to share with everyone. We wanted a little bit of feedback on the trash, hot tubs, parking regulations. We'll go into that, and then occupancy was probably another area of concern. And then ultimately, we're looking for some staff direction from council. There's a lot of things on the table, and so before we get into the meat and the work with legal to determine the final language and what that is, we want to make sure that we're in the right direction and not kind of going down a rabbit hole that council may not be comfortable with. So I'm going to jump right into our first topic, which is conditional use permits. So one of the things that came out of the last meeting was council wanted to protect neighborhoods. And again, I think that is why staff has originally promoted or proposed the CUP process. Again, from the staff's professional recommendation, we think the best way to protect those neighborhoods is by prohibiting those unoccupied STRs in R1 districts only, and then looking at the city rezoning some areas that may be appropriate for that use, and then probably rezoning the R2 districts in the historic districts to R1, since that's their traditional development pattern. Most of those properties, I would say 90% of them are single-family homes. However, that was not the recommendation that we sent in the proposed draft. And that was just because we were trying to find a compromise. We wanted to be able to protect neighborhoods while allow some flexibility for those STR uses. We understand that the short-term rentals are an important part of the community, and I think that's why we're here. One of the comments was last week or last meeting that someone felt that the city had it out, or we were trying to portray STRs in a negative light. I would just like to clear that up. I think the fact that we're here shows how important short-term rentals are to our community. If it was something that we didn't think was an important factor, we probably wouldn't go through and try and look at development standards and regulating that. So we see this as very important to our community and our community character. So moving on into the CUP process, I think that was a big question for everybody. Again, this process is very, very simple, really, but I do want to stress that it's not to be used as a tool to provide infinite approvals of short-term rentals, but it is a tool to be able to use to allow certain areas to continue their transition from single-family or R2 into a short-term rental area. And I'll have some maps to kind of show you what I'm talking about when we get into that process. So the process, again, is the same as the zoning change. It requires public hearings. Requires publication in the newspaper 16 days prior to the consideration. Also requires written notification to landowners within 200 feet 11 days prior to that public hearing. So that gives neighbors and concerned citizens a chance to be made aware of what was being proposed in their area, and a chance for them to come and voice those opinions to council or planning and zoning. I think one of the comments or concerns has been that the process may slow down closing procedures or process for home sales, but this is very similar to other commercial uses. You'll see many Many agents or many landowners that are looking at buying a property, they will make those contracts contingent on a rezoning or a zoning change or some type of approval if it's required by council. That's not new, and it's something that we see all the time. What we did on the CUP criteria, that was something that council had some questions on. They wanted to know what would be used to possibly make a recommendation of approval or denial of those. So what we did was we started with our language that we had in the current code. So our current site plan approval criteria was added to that CUP section. Couple of things that we looked at is the requested property adequate size to handle the proposed use? Is the property affected? Does it exceed capabilities of the infrastructure? So if someone is proposing a multifamily building, do we have adequate sewer or water? Those are things that we look at. This is from our code. The request will have no adverse effect on the property within 600 feet of the proposed subject area. The requested change is to accommodate an appropriate land use and is consistent with other elements of the comprehensive plan. Whether that request is applicable with other conditions will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, and welfare, or materially injurious to other property or improvements in the vicinity. Again, these are things that we look at with any project that comes through our doors and gets on our desk. And then obviously conformity with our rules and regulations at the time. So as part of the compatibility review that P&Z will look at, there are several things that they can consider in their factors. So something may meet code, may meet the letter of the code, but the way it's laid out, they may have some concerns, and so they can modify those. Some of that is access and circulation, get inside the site, adjacent street networks. You know, are the streets wide enough to go there? We have some small street pavement sections, I believe 20 feet in some places. So if you have parking on both sides of the street due to a lot of guests, can a fire apparatus get down there? Those are all things that we look at. Drainage, grading plans, lot arrangements, parking areas, that's all done through the site plan process. So we kind of brought that language into the CUP process so everybody knew what to expect. We also did several conditions or factors that were more specific to STRs, short-term rentals. These are a quasi-residential commercial entity. They operate a little bit different than your standard hotel, but they also operate a little bit different than your standard single-family home. So we kind of tried to find some language to guide the decision makers, planning and zoning, and city council. So one of them is, is the property within 500 feet of a commercial zone? Would the request provide a buffer between traditional single-family uses and commercial areas? Is the area transitioning into a short-term rental area where there's multiple STRs in operation? And given its location and proximity to commercial areas, it could continue to transition, and would that be appropriate? A couple other things we looked at is if it's not located within 500 feet of a commercial district, but there are multiple STRs are in the vicinity, additional STRs within the area may not be appropriate. Kind of depends on case-by-case basis. If the property is not located within 500 feet of a commercial district, but most properties in the vicinity are additional STRs, STRs within the area may be appropriate. And again, I cannot stress case-by-case, lot-by-lot, home-by-home, proposal-by-proposal. And then, obviously, the notification process allows citizens, neighbors to kind of comment, so council and P&Z consider their responses. You may have some area where the homeowners are perfectly fine with short-term rentals in their community. You may have other areas where they're not, and this would give that opportunity for them to voice those concerns. So up next, I'm going to show a couple of maps. Hopefully you can see these. I don't know that the visual is going to be great from kind of far away, so I apologize for that. Wasn't sure what that would look like on here. I'm going to get out of this screen so you can see my cursor a little bit and go to the map. Maybe I can zoom in a little better. So in this area, these are examples
Jason,
of...
excuse me, this is also in the back of the room for those that are halfway. You make up, turn around and look back there as well.
So I won't be able to show my cursor on this, sorry. So if you look at this map, let me maybe stand up. So if everybody can hear me, this area here, West Creek Street, South Cherry, you can see almost all of these properties except two here and two here have been converted to some type of short-term rental.
If the applicant were to come in for a CUP at this process, staff would look at that. As long as they have their parking and we're meeting the rules, we would recommend approval of that CUP. It's in close proximity, walking distance to Main Street. It's a kind of a transition area between the commercial and the existing single family further back. Over here, this is going north on Milam Street. You'll see a large swath of C1 commercial zoning here. And then you see some residential that backs up behind it. There are no STRs here in this area, but given that this could be a buffer between these uses and existing, staff could possibly recommend and support approval of that short-term rental in that location. So just because something is free of short-term rentals doesn't mean that we would be obviously opposed to it, but we would be looking at it on a case-by-case basis. The next map. These are some areas that we may recommend denial. Again, these are just examples, no specific properties. Sorry about that, folks. Give me 1 second. All right, so this area, these may be examples of areas where we may not support a recommendation for approval on a short-term rental. As you can see, someone in this location, maybe within 200 feet of another, they're allowed to ask for a CUP. But given their locations, some of these, this neighborhood is generally untouched, and because it's very centered in the community, it's not really close to Milam or Llano, we would possibly recommend denial on one of these. Again, lot size kind of plays a factor in that, the home layout, there are multiple things. What are your questions?
Well, can you just point out what street that is?
This is West Morse. So Morse and Center. Same here, this is Washington College, Lincoln, Elk. So some of these areas up here, if they were closer to Nimitz and there weren't many there, we wouldn't automatically say we recommend denial based on its location to Main Street. We would probably recommend approval. But in this area, even though there's some here, we may recommend denial. Again, kind of depends on the location, the use, how many occupants, the setbacks, all of those things would be taken into consideration. So I just kind of wanted to give council a few examples of that. We can go into more detail on that here in a little bit. Again, apologize for the slide not being very visible. The second topic council wanted to know some more information about was caps. Staff is not proposing caps at this time. We didn't feel that they were really a good fit for what we were trying to do in this community. I know other communities were utilizing them. But when discussing caps, it's important to understand that there are several types, so staff would kind of need to know what direction council would want more information on. So I try to break it down into two types of caps for everybody to understand. So there are hard caps. These are caps that are limited to a specific number of short-term rentals in the city, say 3,000, 2,000, 1,000. Whatever that number, it's a hard cap, it's a hard line. This number would need to be set. We'd have to do some research and determine what that ideal number of the city would be. This number would also need to be monitored and periodically adjusted just to account for changing population and residential needs. So a couple of issues that we see with hard caps. Moving into the other type of caps we see out there are percentage caps. So this may be percentages of single-family homes in the community. It could be percentages of a block, no more than 20% of the homes on the block, or it could be even something what Austin does is does it by census block. And so it doesn't really follow street patterns, it's just their general census tract, and they do caps in that area. The problem with caps is they are a moving target, so that percentage limit is always changing. So anytime you build a new house, your percentage numbers change. Anytime you demo a house, your percentage numbers change. Anytime an existing home transitions to a commercial use, those percentages can change. So we'd constantly be looking at those numbers and trying to update those.
Very difficult to track, would most likely require additional staff and resources just to implement that or administer that type of program. The other issue on the percentage caps, again, neighborhood caps, like I said, they're based on the census tract. The issue with these is you kind of come into an area, if you're the first one in, you're gonna get in, regardless of whether that house is appropriate. You know, maybe sleep 40 people and only have one parking space. But if they apply and there's no issue, then they would go in. However, if the neighborhood is full and they've reached their percentage cap and you have, say, a unique historical structure that may have multiple structures on it and it doesn't lend itself to be a single-family home, there'd be no mechanism to try and allow that use in that area. So that's where we have a few concerns on that. As you know, our historic district, there's a lot of properties there that are very unique, and they may tend to lend themselves to a short-term rental versus a single-family home. Again, that's more of a first-come, first-serve with no consideration of the use or the layout or its appropriateness. I'm going to jump into some updated numbers here. So this is our permit status, and we'll kind of go through on how we got here. So currently the data, this was of September 28th when we received the data dump from Avenue. There are currently 927 units, representing about 700 properties within the community. So it's broken down into active permits at 690, pending permits at 160, and then closed at 77. So closed are the facilities that may have had a permit and either they transitioned to a single-family home or they're just operating without a permit. I expect that this number is probably going to be 90% are still active. I know we looked at 10 of those this last week, and all 10 of them were still advertising. So they're working with them to try and get their applications in. So those are kind of the numbers we're at. So I think the big issue is to kind of explain how we got these numbers. What we were getting from Avenue, these are very different from what we talked about back in May. So what we were getting in May was just straight requests from Avenue. Hey, what is our breakdown based on zoning district? After realizing that their data was maybe a little bit incomplete on our end, I decided to grab all of the data that I could, just a complete dump. So in my prior life, I was a database manager, and so I was able to kind of go through all of that data, clean it up, took out a lot of duplicate addresses. We found a lot of conflicts where something may show 4 records. It had 2 closed, 2 active. We were able to determine by permit number the closed ones were old. And then under the 2 actives, there were 2 sets of owner information. And so, again, by the permit number, we could tell who were the old owners, no longer involved, and who were the new owners. We cleaned up this data quite a bit, and the reason it's so much more than what we see is we saw a large group of folks after those May meetings that started submitting their permits that had expired. We were getting groups of 20. I think at one point, one operator submitted like 50, so that number did jump a little bit. And then some of it was because we're requesting a breakdown of zoning. If Avenue didn't have a zoning field in there, say the applicant didn't give it to them or they just didn't enter it, they didn't give us that data. So you know, the data existed, they just weren't giving it to us. So that's kind of the difference in the numbers that you see. So here's a map of our updated map. We mapped all of those within the city. I think it says what we all knew. They're very clustered around our core area. Obviously, location of Main Street is a driving factor for these. And again, this is our older area of town. A lot of homes that are up for rehabilitation, so they lend themselves to go in this area. You see them kind of slowly spreading out, but the vast majority are within what we call the R1 core zone. And that would be city limit to city limit, Creek Street on the south to Mulberry on the north is what we kind of determined as the core zone. So here's a breakdown. We had a similar chart back in May that showed these numbers, so these were just updated. So R1 in May, we were showing 231 properties. Today, active, we have 305. With pending added to those, we're going to add, we could get up to 387. And again, if most of the closed ones still are actively in operation, which we think they are, it could push that total as high as 428, which is around 11.5%. So we broke down those numbers again, R2, very similar, 115 properties. We're up to 136. Pending, there's only pending of 163, and then total could be 170. That puts that about 20%. We also broke down the historic district a little bit more. Last time we looked at that, we just had all of the historic district. So we kind of took these out, broke them out into R1. So about 20% just active, and then 27% of those properties are STRs on the R2 side. So we sit at about 22% on all of our residential historic district numbers. If you add the pending and active, that could go as high as 30 for all of the historic district and 35% in the R2. Again, R2 is designed as a mixed-use residential. You can do townhomes, you can do duplexes, you can do small R1 lots, you can do multifamily. But for the majority of the historic district, the existing development pattern is some type of single-family home, maybe a couple of homes if they were constructed on the same lot. Here's a map of the historic district, kind of focused in. I don't know if y'all can see that very well. Again, green are active STRs, orange are pending, and then the red are the closed locations. So then we wanted to update code enforcement. So the image on the left was our data from April 1st through June 30th, and then we picked up July 18th through September 8th. Total violations are down. Obviously, we do have a new code officer. I think everybody's expecting that number to be a lot higher, but unfortunately, he did have to be trained. Ray took some time, a lot of time getting Ted up to speed, so there was some less time in the field, some less numbers. Overall, things kind of where we thought they would be. I would say we did notice a lot of folks after those first few meetings kind of coming to us and asking us what the regs, what were they in violation. A lot of owners and management companies coming to us, so I think they've done a good job of cleaning up, especially in trash. That was by far our biggest offender was folks leaving out the cans, and we're seeing a lot less of that now. So I think this process has helped educate a lot of folks on what those rules are. Police reports, we kind of went through, again, same number of where we looked at the same violations that we were looking at. The numbers tend to line up a little bit less, fewer alarm residences. We did have a couple of assaults, but most of the numbers are still kind of in line with where they were. Ordinance violations did go up a little bit. We are tracking noise ordinance violations a little bit better, so that's kind of, most of that increase was through the noise violations. Excuse me. So when we looked at that, we wanted to refine that a little bit more, because when we talked about this process, we were like, okay, well, we have homes that are generating reports, 7 days a week versus a short-term rental, which may not be generating those all week, every week. So to get an apples-to-apples comparison, we just wanted to look at Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and you can see there was an increase, but obviously that's due to the homes are active at that point. And so if you look at it by the whole week level, you kind of backload the single-family homes because they're generating calls, an additional 4 days a week. So this is more just Thursday, Friday, Saturday. These are the percentages of the calls. So trash, fire pits, hot tubs, parking, that was kind of a big conversation point. There was some concerns about the setbacks. We had put in, staff recommended 196-gallon can per 4 occupants. That was kind of our starting point. I know the Alliance had recommended for 6 people 1 can, so that's something we'll look at. We hadn't set that in stone, so I think that's something we can kind of work on those numbers. Again, the 4 was just a starting point to see if we were on the right track with council. On setbacks, we had side and rear. We had different ones, so we said 15 on a smaller lot, 25 on a larger lot. After looking at that, we kind of settled on just, maybe we just go with the minimum of 15, and this will be in line with the fire code. So any fire pit, open flame, has to be at least 15 feet from a combustible material. That's why we kind of started with 15 feet. So privacy fences, especially old cedar fences, highly combustible, so we want to make sure that we're moving those away as far as we can. We also looked at parking, so we made several recommendations on the parking based on the type of STR. So whether that was an accessory structure in the back or whether it was an unoccupied home. Staff had proposed one per bedroom. I know the Alliance had matched that proposal in their recommendation, so I think, again, working with those stakeholders, I think we can find some common ground. I know it feels like sometimes we're miles apart, but I really do, looking at it, I think there's more in common than what people think on this issue. Again, so that's one per bedroom. All other types of STRs are going to be some type of combination of their use. So if they're in R2 or commercial zone and they're being designed as multifamily, again, we're thinking long-term life of these structures, not just the current use, but the future use, whether that's 5 days from now or 20 years from now. So that would be more in line with the multifamily parking regs that are implemented at those times. Occupancy was a big one. So staff had proposed limiting occupancy to 2 per bedroom and 2 guests. That would be a maximum of 10 people regardless of the number of bedrooms. We did receive some feedback from operators that bedroom size should dictate occupancy. There were several mentions of some very large bedrooms that could probably accommodate 3, 4, maybe more individuals. So, staff's recommendation is that if council does want to go to an occupancy limit, that we base those square footages on the adopted property maintenance code. And that occupancy limit, so I kind of broke it out here to see what a typical house might be able to have as far as occupancy goes based on the property maintenance code. So if you take a 2,400 square foot home and you have a master bedroom of a 13 by 15, and you have secondary bedrooms of 10 by 12, which most are 10 by 10, but we went with 10 by 12. Under the current code, you get 1 person per 200 square feet. All those bedrooms could be 8 by 8, but you have large kitchen, large living room, so that could sleep 14 occupants regardless of the number of bedrooms that they had in the homes, because we do it just on a square footage basis. Under the proposed code, we'd be looking at 2 per bedroom and 2 guests. So this same home under the proposed code would give 10 occupants. Under the property maintenance code, you're required to have 70 square feet for your first occupant and 50 additional square feet for each additional occupant. So in your master, we'd be looking at this home could sleep 3 in the master bedroom and then 2 per every other bedroom. That would be 9 occupants. Again, though, when we're talking older homes and historic district, if you get under 10 by 12, you're only sleeping 1 person. So if this was a standard home, 10 by 10 master and maybe 9 by 8 bedrooms, you would only be sleeping 4 people under the property maintenance code. So I just kind of want to make sure council's kind of aware of these numbers and how they may change depending on bedroom size. So finally, the last thing that staff needs, and this is obviously the most important, is direction. We want some feedback regarding our proposed draft, and that's any feedback. I've gotten some red lines, some proposed changes already, but we want to know, is there alternate regulations you want to look at? Are there issues that you have with the proposed amendments or changes you'd like to make? As far as the CUP process, do you want staff to continue to move forward with that, developing standards, or do you want to look at options to rezone areas or create new zoning districts? As far as caps go, do you want staff to develop standards to set caps within the city? And if you do, and that's the route you choose to take, we just want a direction on what type of cap, because again, they all have their pros and cons to them. Data, everybody's been asking for additional information, so we provided what we have as far as numbers and PD and what we're looking at. Are there additional data sets you'd like us to kind of focus on or see, to move forward? Again, are you comfortable with the proposed regulations on the setbacks for hot tubs, the number of trash cans? Again, I think we can kind of work with the Alliance and fine tune those numbers a little bit. And then occupancy, would council be wanting staff to move forward with the current proposal, or do you want to look at basing it on some type of room size? If it is room size, is it the property maintenance code, or is it some other formula? So those are kind of where staff is seeking the biggest input. And so next steps, we do want to continue working with stakeholders and staff to modify these proposed regulations. So I know there's been several recommendations that the Alliance has proposed, and staff does agree that some of those could be implemented into our contract or into our ordinance, especially when it comes to some of the fees and the fee structures. We felt some of those were pretty well thought out, but obviously that's going to be the next step. You'll see some fees in this ordinance. They're more placeholders. Any fees that we adopt are going to be included not in the zoning ordinance, but in the fee schedule that's adopted by the city. So we'll have a chance to come back and revisit those. One of the recommendations on the Alliance was streamline the process for applications, code enforcement, and payment through improved software. That's something we're also looking at. Different vendors. We're going to be setting up probably some type of request for proposals and go through to reevaluate maybe a new vendor for hot collection and permitting as well. Again, I think there's several things that the Alliance has provided that we can work in, but we haven't included those yet just because we're trying to get some direction before we really start fine-tuning that ordinance. Next steps, I'm going to throw up a tentative timeline, and I will stress tentative. So it really depends on kind of the direction we get tonight, but this would be something that we'll be shooting for. Again, it's always good to have goals so that we can stay on track and make sure we're meeting council's expectations and not getting too far behind in some of our other work. So we would be shooting for a December 8th complete draft of the ordinance and posted for public viewing with the goal of January 5th P&Z. That's the first meeting of the month, and then possibly January 17th and February 1st on the council ordinance readings with an April 1st effective date. Again, there's a couple of things we have to go through: non-conforming uses, permitting. We have to amend the sound ordinance. There's still some concerns with that. We do have to adopt and amend the fire code as far as setbacks. The language in there is kind of vague. So any one of those things could affect this timeline, but that's what we're shooting for. So at that point, I'm going to turn it over to you, council, for any questions you might have for me. And sorry if I went super fast on that. Hopefully y'all could follow.
Thank you, Jason. You did a really good job. I'm going to introduce the panel up here because there's some folks that may be new, and we don't have our name plaques in front of us. So to my left, we have Daniel Jones, who is a city attorney, Kathy O'Neill, who is a city council member, Tom Musselman, Bobby Watson to my right, Jerry Livenbach, council member. Then we have Kent Myers, who's the city manager, Clinton Daly, who's the assistant city manager, and of course, Jason Lux, the development service director. We do have 24 people who have signed up for public.
Who are you?
Oh, yeah, I forgot me. I'm the mayor. I'm Charlie Keeney.
And Shelley.
Oh, I didn't see you down there, Shelley. I wrote everybody's name. I'm sorry. Shelley Goodwin, our city secretary. Thank you for pointing that out. Didn't see you down there. Okay, we have 24 people who have signed up for public comment. You'll have a 3-minute time. When you're down to 1 minute, you will hear this sound.
1 minute.
And then when you run out of time, you will hear this sound. Okay. Yeah, verbal and then a sound to let you know that your time has passed. Now, we're going to have a variety of opinions this evening, and I would ask that all people in the audience will be respectful of these comments because they may not be in agreement with you. So, comments from the audience while someone's speaking will not be tolerated, so I appreciate that. So we want this to be a civil and respectful workshop. So I'm going to call out the first speaker is David Turpin, and then Gerald Hoover is on deck.
All right, can you guys hear me? Yes. Rewind 50 years ago in Fredericksburg, and folks are wanting to tear down the German limestone houses. These old historic homes, they didn't have air conditioning, some of them lacked electricity, and keeping these structures just didn't seem to make financial sense. Enter Albert Keitel. Renowned architect and preservationist, Keitel campaigned tirelessly to save these historic structures. He took the time to advocate, educate, and inform people how to renovate, how to preserve these historic structures. Implicit in Keitel's vision was the truth that even though what he was asking the town to do was difficult in the short term, in the long term, it would benefit the community. We're in a similar situation today. And what we face is an issue that many tourism destinations across the world face. We are not alone in it. And I really want to commend you guys. Y'all doing your homework. The data you're presenting is extremely helpful, and we need to be guided by the data. The truly awesome technology of Airbnb, it's transformed our residential homes into investment vehicles for millionaires and for investors across the globe. But from Arlington to Austin to New Braunfels to San Marcos, you find them, STR ordinances. Collectively, as a society, we have woken up to the reality that there's a fundamental danger that this technology, left unchecked, it poses to our communities. Santa Fe has 5 times the population that we do, and they've capped SDRs to 1,000, which is less than we currently have probably. San Diego has limited SDRs to 1% of housing. Honolulu has limited SDRs to 0.5%. We think we might be at 11.5% now. But what most places doing, or what many places are doing, is simple. Simply phasing out absentee-owned SDRs from R1. Phasing them out over a generous period of several or even up to 10 years. Now there's a large contingent or a vocal contingent that believes we'd be committing financial suicide by taking steps to limit STRs in R1. But I ask y'all, what if the opposite is true? What if we allow the tsunami of STRs to continue to sweep through our neighborhoods, eventually tourists lose their appetite for coming to visit what was sold to them as a quaint historic town and now is some weird mixture of Bourbon Street meets Epcot Center? What if the ordinary people necessary to run this city will increasingly lose any sense of belonging to a community and lose any sense of a desire to be part of a fragmented, tourism-addicted town where they can only afford to live 10 miles out? We are not urging a course of financial suicide, but long-term fiscal prudence and even brand preservation. So may y'all continue the good work that you've begun, studying the best practices across the country, determining the appropriate density and location for SDRs, creating the right ordinance and enforcing it. Thank y'all so much for your hard work.
Thank you, Gerald. Okay, Gerald, you're up. One thing I forgot to ask, if you would introduce yourself and just let us know if you're a city resident or not. And then Michael, and I'm going to say this last name, is it Perskla? You're on deck.
Percola.
Perkla, okay, well, thank you for that.
Good evening, Council. Gerald Hoover, 20-year resident of the city, representing your community voice, an online site going up soon to facilitate some constructive community involvement, more constructive involvement in our local government. We have 3 main objectives. One is to establish a stronger and more constructive link between citizens and local government, and to the benefit of both. Secondly, to provide information citizens need to develop an informed opinion. And thirdly, to encourage the highest voter turnouts in our town's history. I want to commend the STR Alliance, who is here every time, and they've prepared a lot of good work, and they've done their homework, and they're being part of the solution. Your community voice is to help people who are not STR owners to also have their part in the argument. We put up a petition online last Friday morning requesting that you consider a 120-day suspension of new applications for non-homesteaded STRs while you continue to deliberate the final language of this ordinance. We looked at case law first and worded the petition to be temporary and reasonable. The results of the petition are still ongoing. It's been up for 81 hours, so we will let you know as soon as we pull it. Still, we've been advised by one legal professional with Texas Municipal League that due to a recent ruling on the City of Austin's attempt to ban non-homesteaded STRs, that even a short-term moratorium might be ruled unconstitutional. That's one opinion. It may be right. It may be wrong. Austin wanted a permanent ban on non-homesteaded STRs. Our petition was for a 4-month pause. The City of Austin won the challenge in district court, but lost on appeal. However, even in ruling against the city, the Court of Appeals granted, quote, "The right to lease property for a profit can be subject to restriction or regulation under certain circumstances," unquote. Your community voice will chase down what those certain circumstances are and put them up on our site when they're available. Then in a similar case, the City of Arlington won their appeal just this summer, affirming its authority to restrict all STRs to particular areas of the city and ban them from other areas. A different Court of Appeals ruled on this one and, quote, said, "The city's decision to restrict STRs to certain zoning districts and to regulate the operation of STRs are rationally related to objectives within the city's police powers," unquote. Your community voice will work to link your vision of those specific objectives with that of the citizens. This will also be critical to the new comprehensive plan you're about to create. The one thing we hear from both sides is that you should aim your action at encouraging desired outcomes and discouraging undesired. It seems rarely good policy to punish the majority who do the right thing for what the minority of bad actors do. So people seem to agree that the city should engage in aggressive, consistent enforcement with high financial penalties on those doing the wrong thing before putting unnecessary restrictions on those doing the right thing. Your community voice will stay on top of this and work to keep everyone informed. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald. Okay, Michael, you're up, and then Timothy Ellis Riley, you're on deck.
I am Michael Percola. I live and I work in the county. I do not live in the city. I've been talking with people about this issue. Liz is a cashier at a grocery store. She drives. Yeah. Liz is a cashier at a grocery store. She drives in from Comfort to sell us food. Emily lives in town, but she has a new baby, and she's afraid of the rental rate increase coming in December. Cassidy is trying to prove how little money she makes so she can qualify for an income-based apartment. Rebecca lives in a 10-year-old fifth wheel with broken pipes in Sisterdale. We workers live in trailer parks, broken rent houses, overpriced apartments elsewhere or nowhere. Workers are supposed to be grateful for the job creation of servicing tourists so we can be paid by one landlord, drive 40 minutes home, and hand half of our income to another landlord. And when we are priced out of shelter and forced into homelessness, we are labeled criminals. And yet here we are discussing how much to regulate someone's second, third, or even sixth investment property. The basic human need for shelter has been commoditized, denied to many, accumulated by a few for the purpose of profit. The arguments against STRs are grounded in appeals to morality, community, and social justice. The arguments made by the STR Alliance are primarily about money, investments, and property values. Through this honorable council's actions, we may exit this present dystopia and avoid an even grimmer future, especially for workers. The proposal to create an STR zone near commercial areas is sensible. Please judiciously remove absentee owner STRs from residential neighborhoods, restoring them for permanent residents. Please build and protect housing for workers. Please hard cap the number of STR permits and auction them off, letting the market demand set the fee. Workers want an affordable home in town and an income sufficient to pay for it. Council members, please vote for these regulations and take them much further. Thank you.
Thank you. Timothy, and then we have Robert Deming on deck.
Hello, good evening. My name is Timothy Ellis Riley, and I do live in the city. In 2006, I moved here, and I rented a house on Mistletoe, and I had 3 roommates in a 2-bedroom, 1-bath. There was 4 of us in that little house on Mistletoe. Then we all moved to Edison Street, and then I finally got a studio apartment on Creek Street. Of course, I had 2 roommates in that one as well. It was all necessary to live out my dream here in Fredericksburg, and I'm willing to do that. And since then, I've been able to move my parents here. When they first visited here, I rented a B&B cottage, and then they moved here, and I rented the house in front of that cottage, and was able to create a great relationship in the community with that landlord, and they didn't put that house on the market. They chose to offer me that house at a fair price, and even had to become the bank because as a teacher, I didn't exactly have 20% lying around. That's the ideal. I would love it if we knew that these owners would sell back into the community. But that's not something we can guarantee. Since I bought that house, I have become more regular at these meetings. It does make you, fight for your corner. what we're talking about when people say property rights, I'm not scared of. No one's property rights are being threatened, as I understand it. This is property use. And what people have already said so far is that I do support, since a lot of this data has been collected, we've had about 500 permitted places that we knew, went up to about 600 or so. Now we're at 927. I did hear at one point it was over 1,000, and that was in the last 6 months since May. And if we're going to add new ordinances that would go in April 1st, that would be another 6 months. That could be another 500 units. But we don't know. There's no guarantee. And I think there is a lot of prudence and wisdom in trying to, if the word is moratorium or some kind of, a better word maybe than suspension, I'm not, a way to wrangle it before you make your decision on use, which I think I agree with Mr. Lutz. Most of us do agree on most of these things. So I do support our city making abrupt decisions, bold decisions that can be changed in the next meeting. If you guys could vote today or in the next city council meeting, vote on an issue, the next city council meeting you can change your mind. That's the great thing about laws and constitution, right? They get passed one day and they get turned over the next day. So seeing strong action in regard, that's 1 minute, right? Or is it?
That's your 3 minutes.
Oh.
Yeah.
So so Mr. Lukenbach wasn't doing the 1 minute countdown? So I support that. The math is there that says, hey, let's grab a hold of this, make our decision, and then step forward as a community for what is the long-term goals. Thank you very much.
Timothy. Yeah, could you, when you do the 1 minute, be a little more
Forceful.
distinct, yeah. Robert, and then we have, Roland Rocker, did I get it right? Oh, that's Robin.
Oh, it's Robin.
I'm sorry, your handwriting is pretty good.
Compared to Charlie's.
I'm sorry, Robin. Robert, you're up. Thank you.
I'm Robert Deming. I live on West Ufer. I've got a bunch of neighbors in here, or former neighbors. Been there a long time. I actually opened a bed and breakfast 27 years ago and have had one ever since. It's been a terrific business. When I opened that, I thought that I was about number 100 in town. And my occupancy was 3 nights a week. Now it's 6 nights a week, and we've got many, many, many times the number of B&Bs. So I want you to know that I support increased regulation of bed and breakfasts. I am clear on the fact that my guests don't come to stay in my B&B. They come to Fredericksburg. And Fredericksburg is perhaps the goose that lays the golden egg. And it's y'all's job to protect that goose so it can keep laying these golden eggs. I have benefited tremendously from the business, and I am keen on following the rules, and I'm glad that you are considering a serious look at how this impacts everybody in our community, not just those of us in the business. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, Robin. Yeah. And then Sean.
I'm Robin Rucker, and I live right down the street from Robert in that neighborhood he's talking about. And we have, I don't even know how many B&Bs. We aren't a neighborhood anymore. We don't have a neighborhood. I'm concerned about the parking. I'm all about continuing our short-term rentals, but I do think we have to get a handle on it. I have one next to me. Last week I had 6 or 8 women in it partying till 3 o'clock in the morning. That's a lot. There were 5 cars in front of my house and around the corner. The parking is terrible. There are a lot of elder people, there are children. I'm really concerned about the driving and the parking. I think the R1 owner occupied STRs are really important, because those ones that I'm talking about where the parties are going on, those people live in Houston or Dallas or Livingston, or they're not there. They're not to call. So I'm really, really concerned about that. We just need to be, I implore you guys to really, really take this seriously, and I know you are. I know you are. And I was a B&B owner. I had two. I had two short-term rentals just recently on that block. So I agree with everything that these people have said. And thank you. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Randy Breeley, you're on deck.
Hi there, I'm Sean Bryan. I actually live in Robert's neighborhood also, and I am a owner-occupied B&B. I just wanted to go ahead and say I encourage you to go ahead and let's put a handle on our B&Bs. I prefer owner-occupied. As Robin said, there's 7 B&Bs in our little neighborhood, and 3 of us are owner-occupied, and we never have any problem when we're on the premise. Everyone else has spoken much more eloquently I can, but I applaud you for looking at this, and I hope that we can preserve our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. And then Nancy Herden, you're on deck.
Good evening. I'm Randy Briley. I'm a resident of Fredericksburg and a member of the STR Alliance. Jason, thank you for the presentation. Very well done. Just doing some quick math here, 960 units times 500 would yield about $460,000. So what we did in the presentation we handed out, we were hoping to present tonight, we didn't, but the presentation I emailed and then also gave you provides a staggered breakdown of that fee structure, how would that look, and we did look at Hollywood, Florida, and they use a software package called Granicus, which appears to be a pretty nice package. If you all are looking at that, I would encourage you to do so. The initial offering, I think Jason showed more of a peanut butter approach of 500 per. You said that's a placeholder, so I appreciate that. But you know, we advocate for fair and balanced legislation here. We think it's the right thing to do. The town is growing. We need to help fund code enforcement to the best ability that we can. But we would ask to make sure that platform, whatever that becomes, is ease of use for the residents. It's ease of use for the city council and city staff to make sure we're being fair and balanced. I won't go through the full details here. I'd just ask you to read it. But we think this is a more appropriate approach to balancing the ordinance cost fee structures for existing and for net new builds. So it's a little bit of a staggered price. It also puts short-term enforcement fees in there as well for code offenders. If you're operating without a license, for example, it's a $1,000 penalty. So we think there should be some teeth in this, but hopefully it's a better tool to use for all of us moving forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Nancy, and then Belinda McDonald's on deck.
I was fine until just moments ago, and suddenly I got really nervous.
Just take a deep breath and you'll be fine.
My name's Nancy Herndon. I'm a resident of Fredericksburg. I want to talk to you guys about non-conforming use, or what most of us understand to be grandfathering, and how it needs to be updated and included in the newly proposed ordinance. My concern is in the way in which the non-conforming use was completely left out of the newly proposed ordinance. And yes, I've gone to the library for the Code of Ordinances, and I'm going to say ordinance a lot. I found sections 6.100, 6.110, and 6.120. I'm not an attorney, nor do I pretend to even understand the legalese and the terminology used in these ordinances. There could be a lot of ways in which the city could strip us of our non-conforming classifications, and here's just a few of the many paragraphs that give me a little bit of a concern. In 6.100, basically defining non-conforming status, a non-conforming status shall exist under the following provisions of this ordinance: when a use or structure which does not conform to the regulations prescribed in the district in which such use or structure is located was in existence and lawfully operating prior to the effective date of this ordinance and has been operating since without discontinuance. So my question to the city, and more specifically to the city attorney, does this grandfather only STRs that are in existence at the time of that ordinance, which was in 2013? Because that's the date is right under there, 2013. In section 6.110, if a non-conforming use or any portion thereof is voluntarily discontinued for a period of 90 days, etc. I know that you guys discussed it in the last meeting. during the last workshop, and many of you agreed that the 90-day limit would not work. It was a little bit too limiting, and that you guys would be adjusting it. And we appreciate that you guys are looking into possibly adjusting that 90-day limit. I'm bringing it to your attention because it's just another place where the non-conforming rules and the changes would need to be notated in the new ordinance. I'm confident there are numerous other places where non-conforming uses would need to be defined a little bit better as we move forward. In closing, I ask that you update the newly proposed ordinance to better define non-conforming status and to document the city's commitment to grandfathering homeowners with current STRs. At the very least, we ask that you address it in the definitions, at least have something there. Lastly, to assist with enforcement, because we will be dealing with houses that were under the 2018 ordinance and then houses that are under the 2022 ordinance, it's possible that the permits could include the date of the ordinance that the permit adheres to, or possibly we discussed window stickers. The window stickers could be a different color for non-conforming properties, or again, dependent upon the ordinance attached to the year that they conform to. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you. Okay, and then Jessica Miller, you're on deck.
Good evening. I'm Belinda McDonald. I'm a resident of Fredericksburg, and I'm happy to say I have no charts tonight. I want to relay a story, kind of a thought that went through recently as I was traveling. Pecan groves, cotton fields, vineyards, and sweeping vistas of cattle country. This is what I drove through last week on my way home back to Fredericksburg. Occasionally, those sweeping vistas were interrupted with small towns. About 150 miles west of Fredericksburg, the buildings began to take on a similar architectural vernacular. Limestone walls, tin roofs, and little hints of gingerbread. Sadly, the buildings were a shadow of their former selves, their owners no longer able to afford to maintain the once beautiful, if humble, structures. Although these cities were surrounded by agriculture, much like Fredericksburg is, there was little business in each town other than a gas station. The difference? They lack the key thing we have here, tourism. The governor's office has indicated that in 2020, we had $123 million of tourism in Fredericksburg. I believe in the entrepreneurial spirit of our community, and I believe we can work together to find a way forward. Fredericksburg's historic character is maintained today by investments made by STR owners in our structures and in our community. In talking with alliance partners in other cities and regions, we've identified fair and effective measures that are known to work. We believe our community character can be maintained and enhanced through these measures found in your handout tonight. Jason, we can all agree that improved software is key to the solution, and it would solve a lot of the headaches and problems that our neighbors have had to live through since 2018 and before. Many positive technologies are now offered for hosts and municipalities that did not exist in 2018. So let's take a look at those best-in-class softwares. Some of the things they can do is the use for city staff and hosts through improved software portal, provide a 24-hour live nuisance hotline, so when at 3 in the morning you're being bothered, you've got a place to call and action that can be taken. Online permit registration and payment, insights to catch repeat offenders, and integration with citation and adjudication services. These software companies serve cities from coast to coast, including Santa Cruz, California, Breckenridge, Colorado, Sonoma County, California, and Fort Lauderdale, Florida, to name a few. We believe the solutions provided by the Alliance offer a clear path for a balanced, reasonable solution for hosts, neighbors, and for our city. We ask that the council work with the Alliance, city staff, and community members in helping us create a positive solution and a vibrant Fredericksburg. Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica Middle, and then we have Leslie Spraggins. You're on deck.
Well, there's Jessica. I didn't know who she was.
Good evening. My name is Jessica Middle. I'm a longtime resident of Fredericksburg and the owner of Guest House Schmidt Reservation Service. I have served on several different city committees in the past, but I currently serve on the HRB and CBB board. I am also an STR Alliance member, and I'm here tonight to speak about CUPs. I am thrilled that it is being proposed that my clients' STRs would be grandfathered under the current ordinance. Since we have been in business for 35 years, my clients are like family to me, and half of them are local. However, adding the requirement to obtain a CUP in order to receive an STR permit would ultimately hurt reservation services like mine that have been doing things correctly by self-regulating themselves all these years. Here's one of the reasons why. It's a common misconception that STRs sell as STRs and also stay with the same management company. This is not always the case. Not only do STRs sell and do not continue to operate as STRs, but they also sell and sometimes choose to operate outside of a responsible service. Therefore, we would continue to lose properties organically the way we do now, but with the CUP requirement, we would rarely gain properties due to the unknown of whether a property owner would receive one and the subjective way that CUPs are granted. As it is proposed, this isn't just limiting STRs, they will diminish over time. Why is it not enough to have a set of requirements and standards STRs must meet and make sure all of those boxes are checked without being subject to an additional permit? My family has owned and operated this business for 35 years, all while donating countless volunteer hours to this community. I also grew up here, so I am familiar with the fact that we have always been a second home community and never had streets full of families, mainly due to affordability and professional job accessibility factors. The CVB has done maybe too great of a job at marketing our town as a tourist destination, and our business model developed to help fill a huge void in lodging for these tourists. The ordinance as proposed with CUPs would not just negatively impact me, it would affect my 18 staff members who receive good pay, insurance, 401k contributions, and other benefits for them and their families, all of which allow them as working citizens to live here. This would also hurt all of the local people and businesses we utilize and refer to, not to mention charitable organizations and events that we donate directly to. In conclusion, reservations are one of the businesses that have contributed to our unique tourism industry and economy and helped shape our charming community into what has made many residents want to move here and be a part of, all while being good neighbors. And CUPs will deteriorate our business and STRs in general over time. You all know that I am for increased regulation and enforcement for responsible STR growth, but please say no to CUPs. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Leslie, and then Tammy Smith, you're on deck.
Good evening, City Council and staff. My name is Leslie Spraggins, and I am a city resident. I want tonight to give you some ideas on how to deal with homeowners who have purchased property or who are in the process of purchasing property with the intent to short-term rent it. It would be my recommendation that the city draft a system in writing to allow owners to show their intent to short-term rent and therefore be allowed to complete their projects for the purpose they were purchased. Here's how it could work. Anyone who has a deed transfer before the date of the new ordinance adoption would be eligible to come in under the old ordinance in which they purchased their property. Owners would have 30 days to show intent to short-term rent by applying for, paying for, and receiving an STR permit number from Avenue. However, they would not be able to be inspected until, of course, their project was complete. Also, owners must show that their project is in process within this same 30-day period. This can be shown in the following ways. 1, a signed builder contract with an anticipated date of completion. 2, money paid to a builder to secure placement in line. 3, a signed architectural contract. Or 4, a building permit from the city. Obviously, there are other ways this could be shown. These are examples. I've spoken with 6 different local builders, and the consensus is that no one can start immediately on a project. Builders are running 8 months to 2 years out to even begin projects. Supplies are severely delayed due to supply chain issues. Architects are quoting 6 to 9 months to produce plans. The city permitting process can take months and even longer if you happen to be in the historic district. It could conceivably take a year to even get through architecture and permitting without even having broken ground yet. The builders I spoke to stated that they felt there should be no termination date on the ability to complete a project for short-term rentals if owners had shown intent and were in process trying to complete their projects. Some owners will finish in 1 year because they're farther along in the process, but some will just getting started. It might take up to 3 years. Owners and the city should want these projects done right and not compromise quality due to our desire for speed. Owners have the right to use their property for the reason it was purchased while following the ordinance rules the property was purchased under. I appreciate your consideration in this very important matter, and I look forward to seeing what you're able to come up with to address owners whose projects are already in process. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy, and then we have Tammy Pack on deck.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My objective here is that I'm going to
introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay, Tammy.
I even have it at the top to
It's
do
for
it.
the record. It's for the record.
Tammy Smith. I'm a 25-year resident.
25-year-old?
Okay.
Your daughter's getting close.
She is 25, and she is moving to Fredericksburg. 25-year Fredericksburg resident. I'm asking that you consider any house that is 1 to 2 bedroom be changed in the ordinance by right. There are 3 reasons for suggesting this. One is that the perception is that the larger homes are the cause of this disruption of noise, trash, parking, which is why we began this process back when the community, when Jason got the community together. And 1 and 2 bedrooms were found at that time. I went to every meeting to not be the issue of the problems. The second reason is we can all agree that common sense would tell us that a family of 4 is not going to purchase a 1-bedroom, 1-bath on San Antonio Street with no closets and no kitchens. So I'm asking that you, again, consider that to not be a part of this process, CUP capping or whatever, but by right. It's also not taking away inventory from long-term rentals, which I know has been an issue that Kathy has even brought up. And then the third reason is to preserve our heritage, as this town was founded on Sunday houses, which is what a majority of those 1 and 2 bedrooms were built for. Our historic review is very strict, which is what makes our historic area so beautiful. But preserving our beauty and acquaintance for our town, historic preservation is expensive. The way people can justify spending the money is to use those properties as STR, thus maintaining those 1 and 2 bedroom homes in the historic areas that would not otherwise be fixed or maintained. A lot of the historic homes that people would purchase now will be, I believe, in complete disrepair. Again, I ask you to consider 1 and 2 bedrooms by right rather than a capping or a cupping system. Thank you. And because I have another second, sure. Jason, can I ask you a question about your numbers? 680 are permitted, and then you had 160 as pending. Can you tell me how many of those are renewals and how many of those are new properties?
No one, unfortunately, I cannot. The data that we got did not have any historical data. I can say from a database management standpoint, it's very poor.
So would you then say that some of those could be pending? Because I know I have some that are pending.
Yes, we know
so it
some
may
of those.
not be that 976 actually permitted B&Bs, because out of that 160, that number would be subtracted.
No, I did go through and remove. If you had an active and a pending, I removed the
perfect.
active. So
Thank you very much.
We think that's accurate. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Tammy back, and then we have Tara Hutchinson on deck.
Hi there, my name is Tammy Pack, Advocacy on real estate, 25-year resident of the city. I'm a stinking trial lawyer. What is so nerve-wracking about this? My heart's even beating. I did this for years. It's very weird. But in any event, I'm here really to address briefly real estate prices, which I know are part of the equation and part of the concern that the town has. I would say that short-term rentals themselves, or properties that could be short-term rentals, definitely are worth more. If I didn't say that, then I'd be a liar and you shouldn't trust anything I say. In fact, some of you have sold or are currently working to sell your properties for premium prices in advance of all of this that's coming. And good for you, I don't blame you, I would too. The benefits, however, are higher prices justify major rehab, right? The fact that it can bring in income now justifies me in spending way more than I would otherwise. My house, I kid you not, has 3 dead shrubs in the front yard. My B&B is spectacular. You go in San Antonio, 514 West San Antonio, roll down your window, it's breathtaking. I won't spend the money on me, but because it's going to generate income, it is fabulous. That's not only beautiful, more importantly, it provided a lot of jobs for our landscaper, who is spectacular, for the nursery where she bought the plants, for Hot Rod to come in and redo all the sidewalks, top notch. So all of these jobs are being created and kept going, where they're going to be cut back if it's just for personal or long-term. We all know when it's a long-term rental, they might keep the roof from leaking if you're lucky. That's just the sad reality of life, right? Seems like landlords do the least they can to keep someone in there, and we don't have enough long-term rentals, so they'll take whatever they can get, sadly. I do find it disturbing that no economic impact study has been done regarding what it's going to do to our jobs. Guys, you know this, y'all are smart. Prices are high everywhere in the United States. I have realtor friends everywhere. Interest rates are low, inventory's low, prices are high. Not only is this a nationwide problem now, it's not a new problem. As I mentioned, I've been here 25 years, and back then I used to sell quilts. I wasn't in real estate or B&Bs at all. My favorite hobby was to drive my family and friends, and they came to town, what I'd call a shock and awe tour of Fredericksburg, going, that house sold for $89,000. They'd be like, what? Because they're from East Texas, where that would have been $18,000 probably at the time, right? This is not new here, so it wasn't created by STRs, because y'all are the ones saying, explosion, we didn't used to have very many. Our prices were high the day I drove into town. I would add that, well, you're saying, well, great, Tammy, you're saying that this is making prices higher. I want to buy. I like this. Prices are going to go down, right, if we cut the B&Bs? Well, no, because it's never going to be near enough. Will they drop? Yeah. I told you they're going to drop. They're not going to be worth a premium. Are they going to drop enough to do a darn bit of good as far as real normal folk that want to buy a home? No, not in these historic district areas. Those folks, like my own daughter, she looked at what she had as a B&B and said, I could use that same money in the Oaks of Windcrest and buy a family home where you can't have a B&B. So the prices are cheaper there. But they're still too high there too, and there's no STRs, so think about that.
Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you.
And then Connie, Roddy, you're on deck.
Hi, Tara Hutchison, Fredericksburg resident. I'm just curious as to why the council is so adamant about pushing this through without economic data. It's hard and it's messy, but it needs to be rushed. It needs not to be rushed based on an arbitrary deadline. If the city had a year's worth of data, economic data, that backed up their decisions or actions, okay, we'd have a baseline, but we don't. We have extrapolations, personal opinions, and anecdotal opinions, none of which qualifies as economic data. I dare say better parsed data on the city's part would show 90% or more of the STRs in compliance and self-policing. As for the other 10%, shame on the city for not enforcing the rules and regulations already in place for years. And then now you're wanting to change the game and the field of play. If the city had enforced what we have and kept some sort of records of the same, we might not be here today. The city is trying to govern to the exception and not the rule. It's satisfying the minority at the expense of the majority using cups and other restrictions, and that's just not good governance. So minus the citizens that have real addressable STR issues, let's talk about the rest of the 12,000 voters in the city. For better or for worse, Fredericksburg's 4 largest employers are the city, the hospital, HEB, and the ISD. That means the bulk of your economy and resultant budgets are driven by small independent businesses and the taxes and fees they pay. Retailers, restaurants, hotels, wineries, various services and trades, and yes, STRs. Maybe the STR's economic impact is not of any substance, but should you not at a minimum provide an economic study on some of that data? Publicly available information shows STRs pay more hotel taxes than the local hotels do, and we know they contribute to many family and business incomes. Surely that is worth something to the collective bottom line of this city. Finally, to blame STRs for the lack of workforce housing is also erroneous. Shame on us as a city for not doing more to address that over the last decade. If the city had acted, maybe STRs would not be getting the brunt of the blame for this either. Granted, we've studied the heck out of it and paid for all sorts of consultants and trips and charrettes, and to the city's credit, we did get 54 lots in the beginnings that's out there, but there's bold thinking that's needed and big progress on this point that's needed. Trash and noise from STRs are easily solved, but workforce housing? This is a subject worthy of your time, deserving of your best thinking, and in need of your decisive action. But all this over a handful of non-compliant STRs is a red herring. In closing, I would like to say, those who would like to put the genie back in the bottle and go back to the old days and how things were priced back then, that opportunity is long gone. Perhaps the city's time is better spent addressing new ways to put the genie to work for all of us.
Thank you. Okay, Connie Rowdy, you're on, and,
She just passed.
oh, I'm sorry. That's good, okay.
Judge Court.
Judge Court, and then Gwen, you're up next on deck. Is that Judge? Or George? Court, well, Mr. Court, come up. Assuming it's Mr. Thank you. Pronounce your name, please.
Jody Coer.
Jody.
Oh, Jody. Ah,
Yeah,
okay.
you got me.
Your handwriting's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's terrible. So my only concern is, as you can see by my shirt, I'm a pool builder in town. The first time I heard about this ordinance, there was considered 25-foot setbacks on swimming pools, hot tubs, as well as equipment. And I just wanted to bring it to everyone's attention. I think it's now been dropped to 15, it looks like, on the ordinance. That too will have an effect, but I was going to say if this is going to be applied across the board to communities, there's a number of these houses that will never be able to have a swimming pool if it was 25 feet. At 15, it is still severely restricted. In designing swimming pools in people's backyard, it's a large feature. It needs to be designed where it looks pretty in the backyard, and if you want it to look nice, like a Fredericksburg home should, then that's a restrictive ordinance. Even the 15. Right now, pools typically can be built right up to the property line. Is that good for parties? No, but people aren't in pools in the middle of the night. They're in the hot tub. The hot tub can be built towards the house. But that's just something to think about. Your property use is going to be severely limited if you're even in a residential house, you're trying to do it. Now, back to the pool equipment, that's another factor. Every time I put pool equipment on people's yard, I'm fighting the air conditioning for space. You know, if you're going to apply those rules to pool equipment, it needs to be applied to the air conditioning unit that's right on the property line. They use the same amount of, or generate roughly the same amount of noise. So we need to think about those factors as well. Also, with new pool equipment, you're probably not aware of this, but new laws have limited the manufacture of single-speed pumps, which are the noise factors in this mess. They're running at 3,450 RPMs. If you run it at 50%, I have pools out there, you walk up to the pump and you can't even hear it if it's running at 50%. So noise ordinances could apply to that. Half the time it's because people don't take care of their stuff. They have an old pump that's screaming in the backyard and they won't pay to fix it. So that's a lot of times the issues. So I really don't have a lot to say on all these bigger issues. This is a very simple one, but sometimes these simple things get caught up in the mix and then it really ruins people's options in the future. So that's all I had.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Gwen, and then Susan King, you're on deck. Gwen Jewett, did I get it right? Thank you.
Thank you.
Your
Good
writing's even better than his. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm just here to say thank you all for thank you all for even listening to all of us. All I bring to the table is just my own experience in neighborhood. I have had a bed and breakfast for about 12 years, something like that. And but I was on site, and thank goodness, because I had many a night where I had to go across the yard and ask them to please take it inside. So that was very important, I thought. But also, I was
in this little neighborhood that I have, which I just adore, and we have some bed and breakfasts, but they're tiny. I mean, there's like maybe one room or two rooms, I guess, maybe one room mainly. And those are fine. They're wonderful. We don't have any parking problems. We don't have any noise problems, traffic problems, whatever. But our neighborhood is getting so many bed and breakfasts now that the neighbors that were across the street, a little family with children, they moved to Arkansas because, and they loved it here, but they said, you know, our neighborhood, there are no children. There's no place for them to, no one for them to play with, etc. And I'm feeling that more and more, that our my neighborhood anyway, is disappearing. So I just wanted to put that in front of you, that I hope we can work this out, because it's a sweet little town. Let's not lose it. Thank you all.
Very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Susan King and then Judith Wills, you're on deck.
This is not about STRs. Would you rather that I wait till another
You have you can speak, you're on public comment, you can talk about your fishing trip if you want.
Talk about the Aggies too.
My name is Susan King, and I want to thank you, Honorable Mayor Keeney and council members, and you've put in countless hours of service, and we appreciate it. And I live in the county. There is an old saying, the way you get along is to go along, but I just can't go along anymore. We moved to our home 22 years ago, and on 3 acres, so we could have a couple of horses and chickens and other freedoms that living in the country afford. But we live in the area that you all want to annex, and we're not happy about it. And I believe the Cherry Street extension is all about getting another traffic plan, getting traffic off Main Street and spinning it out on Highway 16. But Milam already does that, and it's just like 5 blocks away. This whole plan seems like a bad idea that someone came up with several years ago, and rather than scraping it, it grew into a really bad idea. There is already a traffic diversion plan in the works called the bypass. Why not wait and see how that plan alleviates Main Street congestion before venturing into a very costly annexation in Cherry Street Bridge? I venture to say that the Oaks of Windcrest Neighborhood Association will not stand up for this. And by the way, Post Oak is very curvy all through the Oaks of Windcrest, not to mention the confusing and dangerous access onto Highway 16. City Hall has spent way too much time counting cars and tourists, and quite frankly ignored our kids and families. Why not take the millions that would have been spent on annexation in Cherry Street and put in some decent soccer and baseball fields, pickleball, tennis, and basketball courts? We have 6 grandchildren that live in Fredericksburg and Bernie, and we spend a lot of time attending their sports activities. Quite frankly, our facilities are embarrassing. Porta potties and temporary lighting? Come on now. Have you seen the tennis complex in Mason, the sports complex in Kerrville, the baseball fields in Bernie? Or let's just mention Arkansas too. How about the hike and bike trails in Bentonville? How about putting some of the annexation money into keeping a few things that are in place for kids patrolled by our policemen? Vandalism is ruining the new HEB-based basketball court and playground that the Rotary Club spent lots of money on. By the way, all these kids and their families that come from other towns to play sports here are technically tourists. Let's use the hotel tax on family-oriented activities to accommodate and lure our younger tourists instead of so much of it going toward people getting to come to Fredericksburg and drink. So many things our city government are taking away our flavor. We don't need 2 community-altering road projects. The city doesn't need nor can it afford the annexation project on the agenda. We don't need to promote just alcohol drinking tourists. We don't need more bars on Main Street. Make it home sweet home, please.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Okay, Judith and then Eric Emerson, you're on deck.
I guess I'm just going to throw out my speech that I wrote this afternoon. I don't know what to say. My name is Judith Rost. I'm a 6-year resident of Fredericksburg. I come from a state that one of the number one industries in the state is tourism. I've sat on many seminars where housing authorities were involved with issues such as student housing, vacation rentals, affordable housing, rental inspections, etc. And I've heard them talk about lost neighborhoods and towns turning into ghost towns where locals no longer live in their own cities. I sent emails to all of the city council people. I hope you read, so you know that I'm not just some elderly lady bickering about having an STR next to me. I don't have a problem with STRs in their rightful place. I just don't like them in the R1 residential zones. I probably have more experience in housing issues than all of the city council put together in all my years of experience. I know what's going on in the town. I know what's going to happen if something isn't done. I'm glad that you're doing everything possible. I think Jason and Shelby have put together a good plan. I don't see anything wrong with it. However, I know Jason had said there's 160 pending permits. I would like to see a moratorium put on those permits so that till after we come to some conclusion with the city as to what is going to happen with the STRs in the R1 neighborhoods. Right now, people are buying up properties right and left, hoping to get in on the permit situation before the new rules and regulations are passed, and I'd like to see that stop for a while until we get something going here with the city, get some final word. Permit fees. I'd like to see the permit fees raised for those people that are not living in Gillespie County. I think that the permit fees that you've suggested are okay for people living within the Gillespie County, but I think they should be doubled, tripled, quadrupled for people that own properties using an STR that are not living in our county. I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, David. Eric Emerson, and then we have Dennis Totch on deck.
Eric Hammerson, I live in Fredericksburg. Thank you for the opportunity, Jason. Good presentation. First time I came to Fredericksburg was 47 years ago when my folks moved here. STRs hadn't been invented yet. We stayed at the Peachtree Inn, we stayed at the Sunday House, and we stayed in hotels. And tourists came here left, right, and sideways. That's why my folks moved here. They really loved this community. At the last one of these workshops, one of the points that was made was, we're paying for a lot of jobs with these STRs, and that certainly is the case. But not necessarily with the work that's being done on the houses or the decorating of the houses that are turning into STRs. I've made the point of chatting with people as I go for my morning walks who are the subcontractors that are working on these buildings. Not a single one lives in Fredericksburg. Not one that I've seen. Where do you live? I live in Macy. Where do you live? I live in Kerrville. Where do you live? I live in Harper. Why don't you live in Fredericksburg? I can't afford to live here. I'd love to, but I can't afford to live here. We go to church down in Kerrville, and we tend to go over to Tuesday morning, and there's always folks there with carts full of stuff, and we say, what are you doing? Oh, I'm decorating an STR up in Fredericksburg. Why don't you buy up in Fredericksburg? I can't afford the prices up there. I'm not going to pay $200 for a pillow. Same thing when I go down to La Cantera Shopping Center and see the folks down there. They're buying carts full of stuff to decorate their houses. That money's not going into Fredericksburg. It's not helping the people that are here. So the question I've got is 11% a satisfactory goal for Fredericksburg for R1? Is 27% your satisfactory goal for R1 in the historic district? Do you have a goal in mind? How much is too much? And finally, I'd like to say that as we drive around town, we're stunned at how few children we see. We made this comment earlier, we can't afford lifeguards. We can't find lifeguards for the pool. We just got done accepting an idea for a splash pad. Don't need a lifeguard to be able to manage a splash pad. We don't have families here in town. They're being priced out of it. Now, is putting a moratorium on STRs going to fix the problem? No. It won't, but it's a step in the right direction. You need to have a goal. I would concur with Gerald's point. If you can't make a decision on this until next February or March or April, you should have a freeze on approval of all STR applications until such time as the rules can be agreed to. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Dennis Touch, and then we have Roger Norman on deck.
Hello there. I'm Dennis Touch. I've lived in Fredericksburg all my life, for a few years in the service. I'm in favor of limiting SDR permits. That's probably all I'm unprepared here for sure, but I think we need to preserve our neighborhoods. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you. Okay, Roger, and then we have Mike Mahoney on deck, who will be our last person who signed up.
Good evening. My name is Roger Norman. I live on Avenue C, right around the corner from Jerry. First thing I'd like you guys to know is I am pro-neighborhood. And what that means to me, when I think about what a neighborhood is that you have neighbors. And it's a place where you grow and your children get a chance to grow up, your grandkids have a chance to come back in a real neighborhood, right? One that is not joined, having STRs where you don't have neighbors. You have essentially businesses that are next to you, right? You've got the lodging industry that's moved in next to you. That's not why my wife and I moved here, right? We moved in here to be in a neighborhood. Now, I'm not against SDRs, right? I just think that SDRs should be in a zone that's a commercial zone. They are businesses, and they're not residences. And if you try to mix them together, and the staff has done a great job of trying to kind of figure out how to do that, right? It's going to be really, really difficult. You don't have enough code enforcement people to cover the angry neighbors who are going to be saying that there's too many cars or too much noise or this or that. There's going to be a lot of discontent in the neighborhood, right? Because once again, you're trying to cut the difference, and it just is not going to work, in my opinion. And the downside of that is that one of the other speakers mentioned this, is that when that happens, and there's so much money from the outside who wants to come in, right? A case-by-case evaluation where residents have to come one more time and make their case about why the STR should not be there, right? The money's going to win, which then means that there's going to be more and more STRs, which means that people will be either priced out or they'll just move out. And what'll happen is that the Fredericksburg that we know will no longer be the Fredericksburg that we know. It's going to be a hollow town like Telluride, which has nobody living there, right? It's just a tourist destination. Now, that's not what I want. If it's what you guys want and you think that's what the population wants, then keep going. But I think that would be a mistake. And I think that, as others have indicated, just slow things down. Don't give a lot more permits for STRs until you figure out how you keep neighborhoods separate from businesses. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mike.
My name is Mike Mahoney. I'm a Fredericksburg resident, and I want to thank the staff and council for encouraging these sessions. I think they're valuable. I think you get a lot of input. I think this is probably the biggest and most important issue that exists here. We've got a lot of others, but this is going to determine what Fredericksburg looks like in even as little as 10 years. And certainly what it looks like well beyond that. And you've heard a lot from people, very well organized, who have a strong economic interest in continuing to proliferate STRs. It's in their best economic interest. You haven't heard a lot from people like me, from the past speaker, who are just residents that want to live here and want to live in a neighborhood, not in a commercial zone that says R1 but doesn't mean R1. I think you hear a lot of that. The other folks like me, they're busy raising families. They're busy raising their kids. They're keeping their jobs, trying to pay their bills. And they're not here fighting for this because it's creeping, it's slowly usurping them, but it isn't right in their face. So I just want to say there are a lot of folks that don't want to see what has been happening continue to happen. Unbridled STR growth. I mean, yeah, you can put a bridle on it, but this conditional use approach is just going to slow it down and allow it to continue to morph and take over. We need caps. We need a hard cap. We need to decide whether that's a percentage or whether that's a hard number, but not something like a CUP that is, as he also said, money's going to control that. Money's going to drive that. Each one of those little permit processes is going to, people are going to get tired of fighting it, and the money's going to keep fighting it because it's there. I think I've heard before that, well, there's just not enough motels in this town. And I think that's backwards. I think there's not enough motels in this town because we've let STRs proliferate largely uncontrolled. So they can't compete with somebody that can just buy a house, put a sign on it, get a permit, maybe not, and boom, they're in business. We need to encourage motels. Visitors are okay to stay in motels. There aren't enough of them here. They stay busy. We need more, and we need to make that process workable, but not make the STR process so easy that they can't compete with it. And I just ask you not to throw in the towel on neighborhoods. And I've heard it said, oh, there's already a bunch in STRs in that neighborhood, so it's a lost cause. That's sad. That's showing no direction. I would hope we can do better than that. We can control that it doesn't continue to grow, and we can look back and say, well, maybe we've got too many at some point. There's a number of approaches to take on that. I do support the need for a moratorium now, and I strongly encourage you to consider a cap, whether it's a percentage or a hard cap. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Those are all good. Thank you all for being attentive to all the speakers this evening. That was appreciated, not only by myself, but by everybody in this room. Any comments before we start from staff? Do you want us to go ahead and start our conversation?
Whenever y'all are ready, I'm ready, sir.
With that being said, I'm going to start with the lady in our group. Do you have any?
You want to take a break?
Oh, okay, we'll take a 5-minute break.
The old man needs a break. Hey, Charlie, you just want to do 5 minutes?
Okay, we're ready to get started. Kent, do you want to lead us into this?
Yes, Mayor. Yeah. Mayor and council members, we've had a lot of great input this evening. I think you'll agree, and we had a lot of wonderful input at the last meeting. We've had, of course, the public input sessions that were conducted several months ago. So I think at this point, we've gotten some real good information from the public on all sides of this issue. But I think it's now time for the council to begin to give staff some clear direction on where you want to head to the with regard to the most important parts of the regulations that we're considering. And Jason has outlined in your packet some key questions that we would like to get council to discuss and hopefully reach consensus on this evening. And if you can do that, then that would clearly, we could come back to you with a revised ordinance and get something that hopefully the consensus of the council will support. So if it's okay with you, Mayor, Council, we'll just kind of start with the first two questions on two key areas that are included on the information included on your packet. And again, I'm looking at page with the second to last page of his cover memo there. Don't think the page isn't numbered.
There's no page numbers.
It says topic number 6, provide staff direction. Okay?
Where?
Everybody there? Yep. Okay, so is our understanding that some of the council currently favors a CUP process for handling short-term rentals, and some of the council is favoring more of a cap approach to the STR issue. And so I would suggest we talk about those together, because I don't think any of the council is considering adopting both the CUP process and a cap. So it's kind of one or the other. And so I think the council needs to talk about your views on caps versus conditional use permit. And then if you do favor the conditional use permit, where you stand as far as the criteria, the standards that Jason has outlined this evening. And if you're favoring the caps, then again, are you looking at a hard cap or a percentage type cap? But again, these are all questions that Jason has outlined here under number 1 and 2, the CUP process versus cap. So, Mayor, I would just suggest maybe we go to each council member and see what their views are on that important part of the zoning ordinance.
I think that's good direction, so we won't be wandering around all over this document. So we'll start off with that recommendation. Kathy, I'm going to start with you on caps versus the conditional use permit or a combination thereof.
Okay. Is this on? Well, as a general proposition, I would prefer a hard cap process. Couple reasons. First of all, a CUP process is an extremely long process. First, it has to go to permit request has to go to P&Z. They have to review it. Then it comes to City Council, and we have to review it. The problem with the CUP process, I think, is that it can become very subjective. And my concern is, how do you define, for example, whether it will have an adverse effect? Does, by its very existence, have an adverse effect on a neighborhood? Terminology like materially injurious, what does that mean? These are things that you'd have to consider under a CUP process, and I'm afraid that that process would leave us open to serious legal scrutiny, because if we are subjective in one direction on one case and in another direction on another, I don't know that there's going to be a sufficient standard to direct us in these decisions. I could be wrong. Maybe there are simple ways of doing it, but that's kind of how I see the CUP. I also think that we have pending 160 permit requests. If we put a moratorium until we get on those, until we get some decisions made, then we have 160 CUPs to look at. This is going to be more than time consuming. So those are my thoughts on the CUP. On a hard cap, I don't think, Jason, I exactly agree that this is a fluctuating thing. I think you set a cap. There are
ways of doing it, and we can talk about those, study those a little more. But once you set a number and figure out how it's going to work, that would seem to me to actually simplify. So I am in support of a hard cap as opposed to these others at this point.
Okay, good. Mayor, can I ask council members a question? So that, again, we're clear on your intent. So, council member, are you, by saying a hard cap, are you saying a hard cap for the city or a hard cap for certain areas like R1 areas? What sort of hard cap are you referring to?
Well,
what's your preference?
Right. That gets into other questions. I mean, if you're in an R1 historic area, the cap may all be self-controlling. If you say it has to be owner-occupied and put restrictions on that, that in itself may change things. So we could look at that, but I don't know exactly. I would say it would be across the board in the city.
Okay.
But there could be some exceptions because of other rulings that we might make or ordinances that we might change.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm in favor of a cup process, and I think that if it takes time, it just takes time. Of course, the devil is in the details of what goes into the cup. I am not in favor of caps. Okay.
Bobby?
I'm more in favor of caps. I think the CUP would take too long. It would be a very long process. I think also it'd be very subjective, and I think we could get in trouble with one permit versus another permit, and I just don't think that'd be the way to go. I'd be in favor of a hard cap citywide and a percentage cap in certain areas, because you might have a hard cap for the city and all the STRs are located in a 3-block area in the historic district. Well, you've destroyed that neighborhood. So I would prefer a hard cap citywide and a percentage by area.
Jerry?
Well, I agree with Bobby and Kathy. I really been thinking about the cup, and I think there's a lot that could go the wrong way. I think a hard cap on the citywide hard cap, I think would be a good thing to go. I want to see the neighborhoods back. I want to see where the families are here and are able to live and work. And I know there's a lot of money in the STRs. There's a lot of money. I also saw one diagram where it showed the hotels where the percentages were way down compared to the STRs. The STR keeps growing and the hotels keep fluctuating. So there's hotels out there that have been here for quite a while, and it's those people could be staying in the hotels also. I think a lot of the people that stay in the hotel and the STRs, I think some of them just want to get in a house where they can just party and not care, and where in a hotel they're going to have somebody there telling them to shut up and go to sleep. Yeah, I really like Mike and Roger's comments there on the neighborhoods on that.
So, Councilmember, then you mentioned your favor of a citywide cap.
Hard cap, yes.
Okay.
The percentage, when Jason and I were talking about the percentage cap, that would just be too hard to keep up with the building and the sales and the tearing down and all that. It'd take an extra person just to keep up with, what would be allowed there. On those fire, well, can we say something?
We'll go to the next question on fire pits and other things. Each question is separate.
I always jump ahead, don't I?
We want to see where the consensus is on each issue before we move.
Well, no, I like the hard cap. I think we just need to set a limit here, and then if somebody wants to sell or get rid of one of their B&Bs, then there would be a waiting list for somebody to come in and take over that B&B. Do the waiting list.
I would be in favor of a conditional use permit, and it looks like myself and Tom would be in the minority there. I do have, this is a balance act, with short-term rentals and keeping the quality of our neighborhoods. But I do have a question. The cut would only be in an R1, is that correct?
Yes, sir. Now, there may be other areas where we talked about the short-term rental condominium type use, that would go through the cut process, but that's because condominiums generally go through the CUP process now as is.
Okay. And then the question I would have, with the conditional use permit, as you've already demonstrated in the neighbors would know within the 200-foot what's happening to that particular property.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
They would at least be notified on the request.
On a cap, then, would there be any notification? I'm going to pick myself, if I bought a house on Trailmore and I want to turn it into a short-term rental, whatever that, let's say the cap's $1,500 and I'm $1,499, and if I meet all the criteria of the permitting, I would be able to open up a short-term rental there on Trailmore.
Yes, sir.
Without any notification to the neighbors of the neighborhood.
Correct.
I think that's an important part of what we're trying to, I would want to balance is the CUP would allow the neighbors to know what's being proposed, and the conditional permit does not automatically disallow or allow. They have to meet the criteria in order to be permitted for a short-term rental.
Yes, so the criteria is set out there, and they'd have to meet all of the other regs for the use as well.
Okay. So I've had my say. I would favor the conditional use permit because I think it gives those neighbors in those neighborhoods, as we see as you showed on your map, we're beginning to see them moving away from the downtown area into Carriage Hills and all those other tract subdivisions that were put in a long time ago before short-term rentals were in the area. And as far as Sunday houses in town, and you'll see a lot of them on Austin Street and San Antonio Street, they were built typically close to the churches, where most of the churches were. They weren't used to be rented out for visitors coming in. They were used by homeowners who had ranches and farms out in the country. They could come in on a Saturday, spend the night, get up early in the morning, walk to church, come back, have a meal, and then leave out on Sunday. So short-term rentals or rental property was not the intent of Sunday houses back during the pioneer days. I want to be sure folks that have moved into our area understand that Sunday houses were for the owners that were in Gillespie County. So I'm in favor of a cut, but it seems like the council is leaning towards the cap. So.
Okay, Mayor and Council, we've heard from all five council members, and it appears that the majority supports, at this point, again, we're not making any decisions tonight, but at least for the next draft of the ordinance to include a cap in the language that we bring forward. And we'll see if Daniel or Jason have any further questions on the cap, so that, again, we can maybe get some more specifics on what you're looking at. I have one question, and that is, and for those of you that favor a cap, would that cap apply to both owner-occupied STRs as well as non-owner occupied? Do you see that applying to all STRs or just the non-owner occupied?
And also, is that STRs in both R1 and R2 districts?
Yeah, they said citywide. They said citywide. I heard that from 3 council members.
So you want to know if we think
would the
they
cap,
apply?
say you have a cap of 1,000, would a owner-occupied unit that comes in at number 1,001, would they be denied? Or do you look at what we refer to bed and breakfasts as a separate type of use?
Right. I actually think that in R1 where you have a owner-occupied house on a lot that's over 10,000 square feet, that the ordinance should say they can have one bedroom or small cottage as long as that was their permanent resident of the owner. And so in that situation, you don't usually run into a neighborhood issue because you still have the neighbor living there. So your neighborhood's not impacted because you're losing the people you know. So I would say if we looked at a cap, we could look at that issue, and I think it's a good one to look at and maybe exempt it. And I would say that would be not just R1, but R2 as well.
Okay, any other, Jason, anybody else have?
Well, I
any
would
questions
like
on the
to
cap?
follow up on that. So the caps in R2, if we are going to consider those, you'll see in the ordinance that we anticipate, the ordinance actually allowed an increase in short-term rentals in an R2. So currently, you're capped at 8. And we're proposing that outside of the historic district that there'd be no cap. So if you were building a large facility and it could be multifamily, it's some point transition. So would the caps be for just the R2 district, or would you want to include the citywide? Because there is going to be a difference between those two.
The citywide issue, and I'm not saying that on an R2 lot that is included in the cap. Maybe you want to look at an R2 lot as having too many STRs on it and just saying, reducing that number as a separate issue from the overall cap. You know, am I clear?
Yeah, I just think, well, we'll work on.
Yeah, I think that's
details.
a detail.
It'll be a little tricky because those two development areas, the R2 in the historic district versus R2 everywhere else are different. So we'll have to relook at the development standards, because the density that you can build an apartment complex or housing, that's why we lifted those limits so they're all in line. So we'll take a look at that and see if we can make something kind of fit both realms.
Well, I thought we weren't going to permit STRs in an apartment building.
Existing apartment complexes.
Okay.
Okay, Daniel, did you have any other clarification you need as far as the council's position on this issue?
Jason, I do have, I think Kathy brings up a good point, but also there's a lot of R2 neighborhoods.
Right.
You look at the area around the middle school, that's almost all the area around the middle school is R2. I don't see that as a prime location for an apartment complex. And, but there are other places where apartment complexes, I think, do well. So I don't know if you can distinguish R2 locations within the city, but when to me, an R2 around the middle school and other parts of the city that are neighborhoods would work directly or be considered with R1s.
And so, yes, you are correct. I think we can look at the R2 in the historic district, and we could have a supplemental development standard for those areas. You will notice in the current ordinance for those areas, we did recommend limiting the STRs at 1 per every 5,000 square feet of lot. So currently on a 10,000 square foot lot, you could put 8 one-bedroom efficiencies in there and probably make that work if you had parking. Under the proposed ordinance, you would only be looking at 2 units max, because it's 1 per 5,000 square feet. So are you kind of considering that kind of cap in that area, or would you prefer just, a hard cap? And I think that's why staff's recommendation for that area would, the easiest, cleanest way would be a rezone. If we're really looking at those areas and we want to protect them, I would say that would be the cleanest. I'll still go back to rezoning, I think, is the key, because then we can define those uses, we can define their appropriate locations, and we can kind of take the subjectivity out.
I think those areas are worth saving or preserving, not necessarily saving, but preserving. And if rezoning is the way to do it, I think we should look at that. You do make a good point, which my position has been STRs in neighborhoods. And that would be R1, R2. There's a lot of areas in this town, I admit, not all of them are close to Main Street, which a lot of STRs want to be, but there's a lot of areas in this town where I don't see a problem having STRs. But from my perspective and where I'm thinking is primarily in the residential. So if we do a hard cap, maybe limit the hard cap. Maybe there's a hard cap for R1 and R2, but not necessarily a hard cap for the city.
I follow you.
So, Jason, I've got a question. You know, we're talking about, when we talk about R2, there's not a lot of R2 north of Main Street. There's a lot of R2 south of Main Street.
Yes, sir.
And there are a lot of R2 existing R2 neighborhoods, okay, south of Main Street. There's South Heights, Eddy Street, okay, and under the existing ordinance, one of the fears that I have of the existing ordinance is that it's forcing short-term rentals out of R1 and into R2 by right. Okay, so how are you going to cap, or are we thinking of changing the ordinance so that the density, are we thinking of changing, if we have a cap, changing the density of STRs in R2?
I'd really have to look at it. There's a lot of moving pieces, and we ultimately want to make sure that if we're instituting a cap, that we're not triggering other issues. So I see your concern on, okay, well, if they only go in R2, then we push them into R2, and there's no limit currently under the proposed ordinance.
I drive down South Creek Street and I look at Ufer and I see a new eightplex.
Well, again, those are in the historic district. So
no, this is not in the historic district. South Creek Street, going past Ufer,
yeah.
And there's the eightplex in back that was outside of the historic district. Okay, and then if you turn down on Franklin, that whole area back in there, the South Heights, that's an R2 residential district. And it's established. It's a neighborhood, and we have R2 neighborhoods. And one of the concerns I've had is that our focus has been that the only thing we have are R1 neighborhoods, and that's not true.
No, and I think from staff's perspective, we'll have to look at that area a little differently. We'll have to revisit the comp plan and see what kind of densities they're talking about. When you read through the comp plan and we talk about ways to address affordable housing, one of them is a density, allowing greater density. That is the goal of the R2 duplexes and townhomes. Right now, the market is not driving the move to that. The market's driving the move to other factors. And so, I think we have to look at it, holistically to make sure that in our quest to not force STRs in R2, but that we're losing the ability to have higher density. As we continue to grow, again, 5, 10, 15, 20 years out, some of these areas may be primed for higher density. And so we'll have to take a hard look at the proposals, because again, one change, our regs did not contemplate caps. They were very specific for zoning districts and locations. So we will have to revisit and do a little bit of research before I can give you a hard answer on that one. So I apologize for that right now. That'll be something we'll have to weigh in. And again, it may come that our recommendation is, okay, if this is the route we go, then maybe it is rezoning of certain areas and finding out. It's like you said, there are a lot of single family in those areas around the high school, Tuna High School, and HEB. I mean, all of those are R2 at this time.
Question that I have, excuse me, so you're suggesting at some point in time taking zone R2 down to an R1?
I don't know in those areas. I mean, I think
when you said rezoning, I just want to understand what you meant by
I would really exercise a lot of caution on the council's part, because we're getting ready to start a comprehensive planning process, and a lot of these issues are going to be addressed at length during that process. And the idea of rezoning major areas of the city prior to a comprehensive planning process is not usually what cities do. So I would really like to postpone the discussion on rezoning areas until we get down the road and comprehensive plan this whole community. So
How long do you think that will be?
that's an 18-month process, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ken is right. We don't want to start rezoning swaths of the city. I think that those properties right around the middle school, where we look at 95% of them are single-family development patterns, maybe we can justify some of those rezonings. But yeah, from a citywide perspective, I would rather wait till we started that comprehensive plan and look at those. That's a big, I mean, that's a community vision when we start talking whole new neighborhoods and how they go. So, you know, as a planner, I have a professional opinion on what I think those should be. But if the community doesn't share that vision, then there's no sense in implementing those regulations. So,
I would argue that they're not new neighborhoods.
well, I agree with you on that.
You can't tell the difference going across town, whether it's R1 or R2. And I'm talking north of Main Street.
Okay.
Well, the comment here on the proposed CUP process would achieve the goal of preserving neighborhoods without rezoning areas as outlined above. Staff must note that the CUP process should not be used as a tool to provide infinite approvals of new STRs, but as a tool to allow certain areas to continue to transition to STR area and provide specific locations of STR so they may serve a buffer between commercial and single-family resident. Somehow we just got to, 4 months ago in my neighborhood, there were no STRs. All of a sudden now we got 3 or 4 in there. I mean, it seems like the STRs are just taking off. And, I know y'all want to make money. I mean, y'all are in it as a business. I understand that. But somehow we got to keep the neighborhood. Mike and Roger, I agree with you 100%. Y'all that spoke about keeping the neighborhoods. I mean, we got to keep the neighborhoods. This is what Fredericksburg is about. How much money is how much money, Is it going to, some of the other, like in Colorado, some of the ski resorts, all of a sudden they turned into just a ski resort. There was no living there anymore. All the people left, and then when some of the skiing that went away, then what was left? They got a dead town. I don't want that to happen to Fredericksburg. You might say that, well, Fredericksburg ain't gone down. I don't think Fredericksburg will die either. But I want to see the neighborhoods back here. I want to see the families here. I want to see that they be able to afford the stuff. The reason that these things are, our evaluations are high is a lot is because the homes that are being restored, yes, they are. They're being restored. And this is what's raising the valuation of these properties. So I want to see the neighborhoods back. And if we have to do a cup or we have to do a hard cap, I want to make sure that we get it right, that y'all make money and then people can live here. So.
Okay, Mayor, I think we've gotten enough direction on this first set of questions for us to at least come back to you with another draft.
I'm not 100% sure on Jerry's comment if you haven't got direction. So you're still in favor of hard caps or conditional use permits? I'm confused, Jerry. Just enlighten myself and staff. If you don't mind, thank you.
Well, I like it when you have a cup is when the neighborhood can have input into it. We did this over on Travis and what was it, Travis and Schubert over there, where they wanted to do that B&B over there and add additional 3 or 4 B&Bs there, and the neighborhood, Timothy Raleigh, he'll remember that because he lives in the neighborhood, and we denied that.
Changing zoning.
We've seen several. You've seen several that come
R2 to
before you.
R1.
Travis, City
Now, would a cup allow the denial of that?
Yes, and those were through the cut process.
That was, okay, I will.
Well, wait a second, before you change. Just to follow up on what you said before, Jerry, there's no reason why you couldn't give notice to the neighbors if you were contemplating permitting under a cap. I mean, that could be built into that process.
Can you do that?
We could. I would probably write the ordinance to require the landowner to do those notices. Normally staff does the notice to ensure that we're meeting our legal requirements, and staff will take on that role and that extra duties if it's part of an overall public decision-making process. If it's part of just the application and they meet the regs and they get to do it, I know that I feel comfortable utilizing tax dollars and staff resources and time to make that happen on the applicant's behalf. The only negative is that when we do it, we ensure that we do it versus, so we have to have something, some kind of documentation from the owner that they certified, sent letters and let people know, something like that. And then, again, I'm kind of just thinking out loud on this whole process.
Daniel.
Can I ask, Daniel, can I ask, can a cup and a cap coexist? Can you set a hard cap but you
Have a conditional use
approve
process.
STRs using the cup process?
Yes, you can. So here's an example, Bobby. You set a cap of 1,000. We have 800 permitted right now. The other 200, as applications come in through a cup process, you will be able to approve those up to the 1,000 number. So you could have both those processes in place. It'd be somewhat cumbersome, take some staff time, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, I don't want to get into it. I think you could, yeah, okay. You could have a CUP process until you reach that cap limit. And then once that's limit, then you have to tell applicants, sorry, until we have, room under the cap, then you can't go through the process.
I have no problem with that. I think after listening to everybody, I think it is a good, the cup process is good, that the neighbors be notified, but at the same time, if there's any way of streamlining the process so it doesn't take as much time for staff and it doesn't take as long for the applicant. I'm just looking for the best of both worlds. And
well, I don't think the timeline will change too much. Those are legal notification from state law, so those timelines are kind of set. We're not Austin where we have 1,000 cases and things could get out of whack, but we're also not Austin where we have unlimited staff. So it'll be a balance just like anything else.
I'm still sticking with the cup. I think if you put a cap on it, what occurs there is there could be areas after the cap has been reached, there could be areas in town that would be appropriate for short-term rentals. And if the cap's met, then those individuals or properties would not be eligible if the cap was reached. Is that correct?
Correct, sir. And I would have one follow-up question on the caps. At some point, the requests, at the current rate, at some point, whatever that cap is, that it'll be reached. Is the next step, are we talking a waiting list? That's my assumption, but I want to verify that with y'all.
We could work that out. That's all part of the process.
I think that can be worked out. But I agree that there are some areas of town we don't, that can grow STRs, the commercial areas. I don't know that we have to, I think we could exclude those from the cap. And what we're trying to protect our neighborhoods. And so.
Some thoughts running through my brain, so let me give them my staff. I think we can meet council's request and hopefully get all of that incorporated in.
Great.
Caps and cups and caps.
And anything else, sir? Anything else? Put some beer in there.
But a cap is a cap.
Depends on how we define it. If it's an area cap, a hard cap, that's what I'm hearing is possibly hard caps in R1s and then.
R2 and R2.
And R2 and then some type of percentage in other areas until we hit that. So we'll have to run some numbers and play developer and see what shakes out and kind of test it before we can bring that back.
I think one thing we also need to do to address Bobby's concerns about the timeliness of a process, we can give you an example of an application submitted on such and such date, how long it would take for that application to go through the process, so you can see exactly how many days, because right now we're kind of dealing in hypotheticals, and let's take some hard examples, and you can see, is this going to be 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever it's going to be. So maybe y'all could get to more of a comfort level once we use those kind of examples.
Great.
Okay, all right. If we were ready to move on, then we've provided a lot of data to the council over the last several months. Jason has generated most of that data. And so the next question that you have on the bottom, is there any additional data or information that the council would like staff to produce? One example that was mentioned tonight is economic impact data. Jason has prepared some economic impact data. We didn't present that tonight because, again, we didn't want to give you too much information tonight, but we can certainly provide that to you if you'd like that. But would you like that? And is there, if so, what other data would you like us to provide in order for you, again, to make that very informed decision that you hope to make?
I would like the impact, the economic impact.
Okay.
Data.
That would be helpful, but when you create one void, something will fill that void on that data.
Would you like me, well, I guess my question on economic impact is do you want us to expand on what we've done, or do you want us to look at hiring a consultant to do that kind of data work? I mean, I can tell you, from a staff perspective, to do what we did, I mean, I know it's just a kind of a basic bare bones look, but it was pretty in-depth as far as time goes. So if there is something that you want to see more than that, then I just kind of need to set a timeline.
Would the EDC and Tim Lindbergh help with that? I'm sure he might have something.
I think Tim, I'll probably have to reach out to the Alliance, and I think that'll probably take some work together to see what shakes out. So what we did was just, and are you looking at the entire city limits, or are you focusing just on R1?
I don't know because I haven't seen it. So
let's just give them what we have, and then they can add to that.
If you could show us what you have, then.
Not tonight.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I can better answer the question.
Okay.
Yeah.
What economic impact data are we talking about?
Basically, the argument has been made that when we start regulating short-term rentals, it's going to cause a major economic impact to our community. And some of the examples that have been used is the cost for contractors, cost for buying goods and services, for STR occupants are greater than if that house was occupied for a full-time resident. So we have comparisons between a house occupied by a full-time resident versus a house occupied by a short-term rental. And so that's one of the factors that we can present to you.
I mean, from a staff perspective, we think R1 will be the biggest change because now, again, this was under the current proposed regs where it showed R2 not having any limits. So we saw really in every zoning district, the opportunity for a net increase in additional short-term rentals was up. So where we saw the numbers that, I don't want to say that they would go down in an R1, but they would not be new ones that would be generated. So yes, if some were lost to attrition, we would see some going away. But even then, there's still the opportunity for bed and breakfast there's no outright ban on any zoning district for a short-term rental. So overall, staff feels that the numbers will continue to increase, regardless of what type of caps or cups that we see. Caps may change that situation a little bit, but ultimately, under the proposal, there will be a net increase, and there's no prohibition for that net increase.
The other thing we can do, Mayor and Council, is we can get out on the internet and also talk to other communities. There may be some other economic impact studies involving SDRs that we can access. We haven't done that yet, so we can do that.
Kent, when we do that, I would like to try to use information that's as close to home as possible. The information that was included in the packet, I mean, there's lots of websites from places all over the country, except not one of them was from Texas. Not one of the examples that was given to council was from Texas. So one of the things that, one of the things that we face in Fredericksburg is that we're kind of the tip of the spear. We've been, other cities have looked at us to develop their regulations. Many cities are ahead of us because they decided 15 years ago to restrict, and they can restrict, they can limit STRs because they took action when it wasn't a problem. So I think these are economic realities that we have to face. And the other thing is that this is a supply and demand issue. We happen to be in our community, everybody wants to live here, but God only created so many acres in Gillespie County. And the more people that come, the more they're willing to pay and to live here. And that's been one of the big problems we have with our housing stock and affordability. It's high school economics, and I don't know that there's a solution to it. If we're capitalists, we believe in free enterprise. So it's a matter of how we go about the idea of regulating in the public interest, because that's what cities do. That's what this council does on a daily basis. Is we regulate people's lives, okay? And regulation in the public interest is what government's all about. And of course, the big issue there is the controversy is what's in the public interest. Okay, your idea of what might be in the public interest might be different than my idea of what's in the public interest, and that's why the five of us have got to vote and decide what we feel is in the public interest. And next year we might decide that that's different. But that's the representative form of government that we live under.
Okay, Mayor and Council, is there any other data? We'll put together some more economic data for you, and if there's anything else you need, let us know in the next week or so, would you? Does that sound okay to the council?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good.
The more we talk about it, the better we'll feel about it, that's for sure.
Okay, so if we move to the next page, this is where Jerry had a comment. We have code enforcement regulations are included in the draft ordinance that has been discussed over the last month. And these include things like trash containers, locations of fire pits, hot tubs, and parking regulations. And so the question that Jason has raised here is the council comfortable with the proposed regulations, or are there other modifications of our regulations you would like staff to consider? So, Mayor, I think Jerry had one on fire pits. If you don't mind, maybe he got something there.
Well, the fire pits, I mean, a lot of these fences that are built around these facilities, they're dog-eared pine, and when they dry out, they're just an amber. And I think what I would like to see is get rid of the fire pits. If you want a fire pit, make it a propane one where you can turn the gas off, it's off. You don't have to worry about coals, you don't have to worry about ambers, you don't have to worry about people falling asleep around the fire pit and it getting out of hand. I would like to see that. We're going to talk about hot tubs too.
Well, let's see if there's any consensus on that, Jerry.
Well, my view on that is, remember that when we're talking about a regulation of hot tubs, fire pits, all this stuff, we're not talking about regulation to just STRs. We're talking about citywide. We're talking about a citywide code, correct?
Unless you do a cup.
Unless you do a cup.
If you're coming in under a cup, you could put any of those regulate. You could say, oh, your lot size is too small. We're going to prohibit hot tubs. We're going to prohibit fire pits. I mean, that was one of the reasons staff leaned towards the cup, was because of a little bit of the flexibility towards specific, again, unless you live in a tract home subdivision, no property is alike. And I think especially in the historic district, that everyone is unique in how it was built, the development pattern, the age. So yes, if we don't go a cup and we're talking a fire pit prohibition or something like that, then yes, it would apply citywide.
Citywide?
Yes, sir.
Just like the noise ordinance.
I think you could maybe craft it to where setbacks for fire pits could be reduced if they were gas or something like that. We could look into those, but if that's one of your thoughts or concerns, then I think that's the point of the direction, so that we can have the next level of research to do and how far we can go with those regulations or what the legal requirement is.
On anything involving fire pits, we've made a habit of involving our fire marshal and fire chief in those discussions, and they're not here tonight, so we would like to get their input before we address some of that issue too.
But the minimum setback for open flame is 15 feet to a combustible, and that's from the fire marshal's office. That's in the fire code, so that's why we started with that number.
I think the 15 feet is fine. What you propose is fine.
Well, we'll still look at it, Jerry, and
Right.
come back. We can at least give kind of some options.
Right.
Fire pits, anything else on that?
Well, like Tom, good point, it's not only going to affect short-term rentals, it affects everyone inside city limits. That's a concern I have, situation. Because most people, I won't speak to myself, but, hopefully I put my fire out before I go in the house.
Okay.
But if we're following the fire marshal's standards, then I don't see a problem.
Yeah, he's got a recommendation on an amendment to this. Okay. Okay, so we'll bring that back. That'll be, as Jason mentioned, that's a separate ordinance, and we've already got a draft that's been prepared by a fire marshal on that ordinance. So.
I would think that it would be in the best interest of the STR if they did go to a propane. That way, it's protecting your business.
Investment.
So,
We could recommend that, but without requiring it, Jerry. Okay. Hot tubs, could you have just setbacks on hot tubs?
Well, I think they need to be screened or something on them. I don't know. If you got it there, it's less like the gentleman talking with the swimming pool in there. You got a pool there, hell, they're gonna be in that thing all night long until they can, or the hot tub. Yeah, that's just the way it is. I was young once. Hell, we swam a lot of times in the lake too, at midnight, Who hasn't? But somehow we have to, if it's in town like that, it needs to be regulated. And I would say if there was, you're gonna put in a hot tub, we'll go ahead and screen it, so that you're not being a problem to your neighbor.
Okay, council member, screening of hot tubs, you want to add that to the ordinance?
Is that's all over town?
That'll be all over town.
Unless you have a cup.
Okay, unless you have a cup. But there's not as many hot tubs in non-STR units as there are in STR units, but there's quite a few out there in our community, hot tubs. So, yeah, you would have to, of course, they'd be grandfathered, existing would be grandfathered, but then you'd have to require, yeah.
I don't want to get into the screening of hot tubs. The setbacks, I agree with. If you have a fence, to me, that's good enough for screening, so.
Screening or screening? I just want the neighbors to be able to, if you want to go to bed at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night and go to sleep, you should be able to do that without having somebody right across the fence sitting in the hot tub, drinking their martini or whatever, and just going all night long talking.
Jerry, I wanted to just remind you, that's why we have the quiet zone regulations added to it.
Well, how is that, is Chief around here?
No.
Think he's gone? Has that been working out? And, you know, we have the ordinances, we have the rules. Are they being enforced? Is there a problem? If the enforcement is done, then, I don't think I'd have a problem with it then.
Well, and I think keep in mind that we are going to look at amending the sound ordinance on where we're taking those measurements, so that will help a lot of individuals when they call police and they can get those readings and they can find those violations. You know, it's not going to help with the fact that that person still has to wake up at 3 a.m. to call the police, but at least when they go out there, I think, depending on how we write that ordinance, it gives the city a little bit more teeth to enforce that code. Currently, that's been what's problematic on the noise.
This 15-foot setback does not apply to swimming pools, is that correct?
Not right now. Well, the current code is proposing both. I did get Mr. Jody's email and kind of did some research, and again, I think maybe we could talk 5 feet to 10 feet to the water's edge. We need to look at that a little bit, but again, I think building your pool to the property line is problematic regardless of the SDR conversation, so we need to start looking at those.
Is that in current code that you can build it to the property line? Is that a factual statement?
Yes, there is no prohibition or setbacks for swimming pools, so yes, they can go right up to the property line.
Well, you don't go out and build a garage for a Prius and then expect to put a dually in it. You know, that's not going to work. You know, you do what you can with what you got. If it's not big enough for a pool, then don't put it in a pool. Put it out there. Big indoors.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay, so anything else on code enforcement? Again, I call your attention to, not necessarily this evening, but in the next couple of days, refer back to pages 80 through 85 of the draft ordinance. And those are where all the code issues are addressed. And if you have any other suggestions there, let us know. But we're assuming that y'all are okay with most of those. Okay, occupancy, the question that Jason has framed here is the council comfortable with the proposed occupancy limits, or would you like staff to develop regulations based upon unique bedroom sizes? Again, the original proposal was 2 per bedroom with an extra 2. Jason this evening presented some additional options related to the size of the bedroom. And so which of those 2 options are y'all?
Well, my feeling is that many of the problems, if not a majority of the problems that have led to the STR discussion are based upon occupancy. And my feeling is if you lower occupancy, you lower problems. So I'm for I think there's a lot of merit in the property maintenance code. What's the code, the square footage for people in hotels?
Hotels, there's no minimum square footage as far as the property maintenance code doesn't contemplate that. It talks about exits, but we did look at that. If you take your standard hotel room, Holiday Inn Express or any of the ones in town, generally I believe they're 385 square feet, 325 square feet. I can't remember off the top of my head. Basically 13 by 25. That includes the bathroom area. If you're looking at 8 by 5, that could be 40 plus. If they're sleeping 4 people, when we did the study, it was about 80 square feet a person.
Okay. Well, I know the issue that got me was the idea that in some short-term rentals they were having bedrooms within bedrooms within bedrooms. Okay, which meant they were overcrowding. So I would like to see a reduction. I think the 10 occupants, the property maintenance code figure, more discussion, about that, because I think if we reduce occupancy and tie that with, none of these are standalone issues. The occupancy is tied into the parking, is tied into the trash, is tied into the setbacks. It's all combined. So
If you cut down on occupancy, you cut down on the need for parking. If you limit the amount of parking, you necessarily cut down on the occupancy. Okay? And I think that helps get us to what we're trying to do to control short-term rentals, to make them sustainable in our community.
You want me to go? Okay. Well, I agree. I think the property maintenance code is a good guide. It would require that on inspection, all the bedrooms would be measured, and that would be part of what information you would have for permitting.
Yeah, we would most likely, if we go with the property maintenance code, that will just, speaking bluntly, will increase the permitting time. We will have to start requiring full-blown interior layouts of buildings so we can verify those and take those. Currently, right now, you kind of just show your bedrooms and your parking, so that'll be a little different. I think for most of the operators that are having their permits pulled by some of the local management companies, I think that'll be doable. I think the only people that'll probably be affected will be the kind of one-off mom and pop folks, but I think we can walk them through that process.
Excuse me. Yeah, I think that's a good guide.
Certainly doesn't streamline it.
Not as much, but we'll do it as best we can.
Run some scenarios with the different size homes, because, not right now, but give us some examples. Because if the difference is, on one example you showed, was one person.
In a historic district, that last one I showed where they had 9, a historic district, generally the main room will probably be 10 by 10, and each additional bedroom would be smaller, 9 by 8. And so you'd be looking at 4 people in a 4-bedroom house, and depending on the age of the home and all of that. So it could get pretty small. But I'll have Anna pull some of the homes that we've looked at recently and some of the new construction, and we can kind of give you maybe 10 or 12 options there to see what each home would be allowed under each section. So.
And if we find that the difference is very little, then I would say, let's just go with the 2 per bedroom plus 2.
Right.
Proposed.
Okay.
Yeah,
A lot easier.
And I tell you what, measuring anything, you'll find 3 measurements from 5 different people.
Yeah.
And then they'll throw in centimeters and meters, so that'll make it more complicated.
But then I think one of the issues is that the over occupancy of STRs. You might have 3 bedrooms that sleep 2 people each, but then how many people are sleeping on an air mattress that's stored in a closet in the middle of the living room? So this is where the STR owners and the STR management companies are going to have to help the city with occupancy.
This is probably the hardest area for enforcement. We can't knock on the door at 11 o'clock and say how many people you have sleeping there. It's just, but we can certainly come up with a regulation. But again, I wanted the council to be aware of the difficulty in enforcing any sort of occupancy limitation.
Maybe I might have 10 sleeping in the hot tub.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, I think we've got enough direction on that, and so we'll come up with scenarios on that. We'll leave the language like it is for right now until we come back to you with some scenarios, and then we can continue the discussion on this item. So at this point, I'd just like to stop there and see if there's any other issue. What we've basically done, council, is we've provided you a first draft of the proposed zoning regulations. And based upon the comments and discussion tonight, we'll come back to you with what we'll call a second draft. And this may continue. We may have to go through several more drafts before we get to the point where the council's comfortable with this. But at least we got some direction from you on revisions, and hopefully in the next couple of weeks we can come back to you with this second draft and we can continue the discussions Is there any other issue that you would like for us to address in the second draft of the ordinance?
One thing I'd like, I'm not sure, correct me if it's in there that I didn't read it, is for non-payment of hotel occupancy taxes for the people that that don't pay. Maybe they're paying their state tax, but they're not paying their local tax. My feeling is if you're not paying your taxes, you're not part of the solution, and anybody that is not paying taxes shouldn't have the privilege of operating in our community. So I would suggest that we have some kind of penalty, that if you are convicted wherever in municipal court or in our administrative court of non-payment of taxes, that there be a severe penalty of pulling your permit for a specific period of time, 90 days, 180 days, a year, and that we want people to obey the rules. We want people to follow the rules, and human nature is some people think they don't have to obey the rules, and my feeling is if you're one of those people, you need to be nailed.
So we do have something similar in the code. I'll have to tweak it. We'll have to tweak it to make it match. We did say that if we found you operating a short-term rental without a permit and you had been operating it, that when you came in to get your permit, we would prohibit you from 1 year to apply for your permit. So hopefully that will get folks in us early to make sure they're in compliance, but we did not address those that may have an active permit but may have not been collecting hot. I don't know that that's a high number, but we can look at that language. Yes, sir.
I would appreciate that. That's called tax evasion.
Anything else the council would like to address?
If you don't mind, we heard from a lot of people tonight asking that we put a halt on granting any further permits for a period of time until we can come to some decisions and put ordinances in place. I would be in favor of that, some form of that. I don't know if anybody else on the council has any interest in doing that, but if we continue to approve permits for the next 6 months, as someone from the audience said, we could have 500 more before we get some rules in place. So, listening to the audience, I think that maybe we should consider it.
So you're suggesting we have a moratorium? I think that the city attorney needs to weigh in on that.
Good job, man.
So I believe we've discussed this issue before, or at least I've discussed it with council, and moratoriums are not outright prohibited by law. There is a time, and when the facts warrant it, a moratorium can be put into place lawfully. What the council would need to decide, if you were going to have that discussion, was what the reason or the rationale was for the moratorium. And I think needs to be more specific than just we need more time to look at this issue. It would be we need specific information we haven't gathered yet, or certain questions that we can't answer without spending some time looking at them. Another consideration on a moratorium is, when you lift the moratorium, do you need to give a window of time for people that were to take action under the existing law before you change it? So
That's right.
I've got more concerns if the council were to implement a moratorium, try to change the ordinance while the moratorium's in place, because you're essentially giving these people no notice that they can't govern themselves accordingly because you've sort of pulled the rug out from underneath them. So I think and I haven't researched this, recently, and this is something that would be fairly technical in analysis, but I just want you to be aware that there's a potential that if you were to impose a moratorium try to change the ordinance while it's in place, that you wouldn't be able to, I just think we wouldn't withstand scrutiny on that type of approach, so. But I can't answer that question right now. I mean,
So Daniel, the schedule that we've got laid out here, and again, this is not set in concrete or anything, but calls for the council to adopt the ordinance on February 1st with an effective date.
April 1st.
No, I'm sorry, adopt the ordinance on February 1st, and then the ordinance would actually be effective on April 1st. So would that satisfy your concern regarding an adoption date and then an effective date being separated by several months?
Are you proposing that if there was a moratorium that it would be lifted on February 1st, for
Right.
example, and then?
That's right. I'm just using that as an example, Mayor and Council. If you wanted to do a moratorium, and you could argue while we are considering this ordinance and all the research and all the changes to the ordinance, we would establish a moratorium till February 1st, but it would not be effective till April 1st. Could we do something like that, Dan?
I mean, again, without researching this, I can't give you a certain answer, but I think a period of time would be preferred to having no window before implementation. And again, I mean, a moratorium can be implemented only for the minimum amount of minimum amount of time necessary to do your sort of study. Anything beyond that, then you run into issues with constitutionality of the moratorium. So. And there's no bright line test on that. It's all fact driven. So, we would have to look at it, depending on what issues the council wanted to consider. So, I guess the next step on that would be, if council was interested in having that discussion, would be to put it on a future council meeting. And then, prior to that, I could produce additional analysis and guidance on that issue if needed.
At this time, I'm not comfortable saying I'm for or against without knowing more information about it. I understand why people are calling for moratorium. I'm just not comfortable committing to yea or nay yet. So.
I'd like to ask some more questions too on that. What happens when somebody's already started the process of transforming the property into an STR? Does that moratorium, what does that do to them? You can't have them expected or want to do this and then turn around and, shove them under the rug. You can't do that.
Tom, have you had your comments?
I'm not sure that a moratorium is legal. I mean, that's what our attorney's got to tell us that. The things that we need to think about with the moratorium are, okay, during the period of time of the moratorium, does everything stop? Does that mean that as a property owner who was purchasing a piece of property to perhaps turn into a short-term rental, that we go into suspended animation until the end of the moratorium? Are my rights to develop this property under the current regulations taken away during the moratorium? I guess that's a question that I have there, Daniel, and that's.
I think that would depend on how it's implemented. What I'm envisioning is some sort of proposal where, I guess people could continue to file their STR applications, but permit applications, but they would just sort of essentially stack up until the moratorium ends, and at that point, staff would begin processing.
Okay, would they still be valid, though? Would they still be valid applications?
What do you mean by valid?
Well, I guess the discussion here is we have too many
we want to stop the number of STR permits that are going out. Does a moratorium stop the number of STR permits, or does it allow people to apply for the permit, but you can't receive your permit until after the moratorium?
That's what I suspect would be, that you would apply, but it wouldn't be processed and issued until the moratorium was ended. But again, that's up to council. If you were to if you were to address this issue, it would be at your discretion as far as how and what is affected by the moratorium. Another thing you'd have to consider is somebody that's already existing when they file a renewal application. I mean, are you talking about just new applications or renewals also? So you would have to, I mean, there's some of those kind of administrative side issues that would have to be considered, I think, as part of that discussion.
And if I could add, I think we'd also have to consider those under construction. From a planning perspective, if you're under construction, you are under construction, a moratorium wouldn't stop that. I think a lot of people forget, they'd say, well, we're building an STR, we're building, or we're converting this to an STR.
But you don't.
Ultimately, you're building a home, single-family home, and you're renovating a single-family home. The STR permit comes after the fact, so you may build something, may not meet code, you may not get your permit, but that wouldn't stop you from building in that instance, because we issue building permits. So I think that's a common misconception that we see, is people assume that they're building an STR. They're building whatever land use is there, and they're applying for a permit at a later date. So it's a subtle distinction, but I think it's one that needs to be addressed.
I would think that a moratorium would, I can understand the concern, but I think because of what's been discussed, I would be in favor of further discussion on that. I think we got it.
Okay, any other thoughts for tonight? Dana?
I hate to open two more issues, but they've been discussed at this meeting and previous meetings. So I need to know if council is interested in us addressing these issues now, or if you want to wait on these. And the two issues are the grandfathering of the non-conforming uses. Do you want us to start working on proposed? Well, there's two options on those. One is you can use what we've got now, which is the general non-conforming language, or we could start on working on some more specific language that would be applicable only to STRs and non-conforming STR uses. The second issue is dealing with individuals that have purchased property or mid-renovation or somewhere in that process up to filing their application for permits for an STR that likely won't be ready in time if there's any proposed changes. You know, how do we want to deal with them from an administrative standpoint, where they can essentially, I don't want to use the term vest, but vest their right to do an STR application, even if they're not ready for that at the time of an ordinance change. I think these are two big issues, but they're sort of on the back end because, you know, council's really focused right now on what potential changes may occur in zoning and things like that, but implementation of that's going to require answering these two issues. So I don't know if you want to address these at the next meeting we have, or if you want to hold off on those for a later date. I mean, I know I've discussed them with council. Council's aware of these issues, and we're going to have to address them at some point. I just don't know when you want to do that. So that's my question, I guess.
I'd like to see us address them sooner than later.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to thank everyone for your input tonight. For me, it's been enlightening. I'm thankful that everyone was positive and brought good information with them. Seeing both sides, presenting your comments in a positive manner really made this an enjoyable meeting from my standpoint. And I just want to thank everybody for their input.
You can tell it kind of bothers us. I mean, like Bobby said, we want to get it right, and we want everybody to, you're not going to please everybody, I guarantee you that. So, yeah, thank y'all for your input. We're still working on it. We're still trying to figure it out, and I feel that we'll get it all ducks in a row, and I'm not gonna make everybody happy, I guarantee.
Tom, any concluding comment?
No concluding comments. Thank you for what you've said tonight, what you've said in the past.
Kathy?
I agree with Bobby. I really appreciate the tenor of your comments and the content. It was really a privilege to hear you speak, so from the heart and from the mind. So thanks for being here, and it's not an easy thing that we have to do, and but we'll try to do it in a way that's transparent and fair as best we can.
Yeah, thank you again. I made that comment earlier, very much appreciated. Staff, any other comments?
Well, I'll just mention one thing. The staff is also working on the RFP for software services. We are wanting to change from Avenue Insight as we reported. We anticipate that RFP will be ready to send out no later than next week. And then we'll set up some demos and make a recommendation on who to retain for permitting, inspection, hot collection, and other services, online services that we need. So that process is continuing also.
Thank you guys for all y'all do. I mean, y'all put a lot of time in on this stuff and a lot of thought, and yeah, thank y'all. Appreciate it. Yeah, it is your job, but I mean, y'all do it very well.
With that all being said, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Motion by Terry, second by Bobby. Any further discussion on adjournment? Yeah, I'd like to talk for an hour. No, all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you all.